this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
This is Special Agent Regal, Special Agent Bradley Hall.
In 2018, the FBI took down a ring of spies working for China's Ministry of State Security, one of the most mysterious intelligence agencies in the world.
The Sixth Bureau podcast is a story of the inner workings of the MSS and how one man's ambition and mistakes opened its vault of secrets.
Listen to The Sixth Bureau on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, The Case of Lucy Letby, we unpack the story of an unimaginable tragedy that gripped the UK in 2023. But what if we didn't get the whole story?
Evidence has been made to fit.
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapsed.
What if the truth was disguised by a story we chose to believe?
Oh my God, I think she might be innocent.
Listen to Doubt, The Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, it's Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And today I'm talking with my dear friend, Krista Williams.
It can change you in the best way possible. Dance with the change, dance with the breakdowns.
The embodiment of Pisces intuition with Capricorn power moves.
So I'm delusionally proud of my chart.
Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd. In 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
But here's the thing. Bachelor fans hated him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
That's when his life took a disturbing turn. A one-night stand would end in a courtroom.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everybody, Robert Evans here, and I wanted to let you know this is a compilation episode. So every episode of the week that just happened is here in one convenient and with somewhat less ads package for you to listen to in a long stretch if you want. If you've been listening to the episodes every day this week, there's going to be nothing new here for you, but you can make your own decisions. Gonorrhea! Garrison, take over.
I asked for some grunting. That was like a word,
what?
But okay.
What?
It was gonorrhea.
Bastards That's opening. How you open a show.
I know. Lots of the Could Happen Here openings have become Bastards openings now.
I only have one kind of opening.
Yeah, Robert doesn't have more than one type of opening.
No, there's two. There's grunting and then yelling something weird.
That's basically the same.
Learning how to do your job is cuck shit.
Also, to be honest, most of the time doesn't know which podcast he's doing. They're all the same thing.
What is this? Are we doing? Is this the Daily Zeitgeist? Am I Jack O'Brien?
No,
who are we?
This is
Which one of you is Miles?
This is It Could Happen Here.
We're talking about
shit.
Miles. Me.
So we're talking today about the different things that are the here being the states this time. But we're talking about basically over the course of the past few months, we have covered a few different topics on the show. And some of which have already kind of had some results or have had updates to what we've already covered.
Cool.
So I'm gonna go through a list of 3 different things that we've covered and talk about kind of the updates in these stories. Most of what we've covered around these topics have been like a mix of original reporting and interviews. So now there's been further work done on this, and I just want to kind of update people if they're not as terminally online as us. Maybe they have not heard that there's been changes to these stories, and I wanted to kind of put together a nice little concise thing talking about updates to all the things we've covered. So the first thing that we're going to be talking a bit about is the Cop City in Atlanta and the Defend the Atlanta Forest Coalition. So I think a day after our episode dropped on that, Atlanta City Council voted 10-4 in favor of getting the militarized police training facility greenlit, nicknamed Cop City. There's 17 hours of public testimony where 70% of the callers spoke out against the facility.
Yeah, but we had that happen in Portland. Over,
it doesn't.
It never matters. It doesn't matter what the vast majority of
especially when there's money involved.
Yeah, Yeah, do not ever be deceived into thinking that you live in a democracy and that what you actually want matters in any way, shape, or form. This is empirically not true.
Like 65% of Texans, period, support vaccine mandates in some instances, but the governor just made it illegal to do them ever. Like it's that way across the board, across the nation. People ask sometimes, because when you get into anarchist discussions of politics, there's a lot of criticism of democracy. I think democracy is a lovely idea. I would like to try it sometime.
It would be nice to give it a go.
It would be nice to experience.
So the city council voted to lease the 350 acres of city-owned forest land to the Atlanta Police Foundation. At least 85 acres of which is going to be slated to become the police training facility. The facility is going to cost around $90 million.
Jesus Christ. I could train cops much cheaper than that, although training is the wrong word.
Yeah, that is the wrong word for that. $90 million. It's going to include a state-of-the-art explosives testing facility, firing ranges, emergency vehicle operations course, a classroom space, and an emergency
there's a classroom
helicopter
space, so they'll probably learn to read, right?
I'm sure it's for teaching people to do bad things. There's going to be an emergency helicopter pad and an entire mock town.
It is good that they have the emergency helicopter pad, because cops shoot each other with live ammunition all the time in those training houses.
That does happen.
It happens constantly.
Yeah, that does happen a lot. So the main backer for this project is the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is a political advocacy group that has a lot of funding from corporations, and they try to sway the political power of the city into giving more power to the police.
Oh no way.
So the interesting thing about this, though, is the vote was supposed to happen in August, but it was rescheduled for early September after there was a lot of public backlash around this proposal. Then the vote that was supposed to happen on the 13th got pushed back a whole day because there was too many callers saying that they didn't want the facility. So the vote got pushed back a day in September, but they still voted for it. Yeah, so $30 million is going to be footed by taxpayers. And the other $60 million is going to get paid for by the Police Foundation, which has a lot of different corporate donors. So that's that. And of course it's on this forest land, which is some of the biggest forest land in any major American city. So they're tearing down all this forest to build this concrete city to train cops in.
So, we should also mention that at the end of our interview with some of the people resisting this, they basically said if the vote goes through, resistance is going to continue. So resistance will continue.
There's probably going to be efforts to actually try to physically prevent the construction of this, but the next thing we're going to be talking about is Stop Line 3, which means there was also physical efforts to prevent that, but the type of efforts that people usually do in modern green activism usually are a lot more performative, or they're specifically to pressure to create scenes that will try to convince politicians to veto the process. So it's not, it's different from the 90s when it was easier to actually physically stop the prevention of things. Now, a lot of the people who, are trying to do this, they're not convinced that, doing a lockbox is going to actually physically prevent it. What it's going to do is create media coverage that is going to hopefully convince politicians to be hey, maybe we shouldn't do this. And that's a hard bargain, right? There's no saying that that's actually going to do the thing. In the case of Stop Line 3, that did not stop Line 3. There was a really good critique of the Stop Line 3 protests posted in It's Going Down by an indigenous anarchist who lives on that land, who was younger. And they're, watching all of these, older indigenous anarchists, keep on getting arrested and brutalized, and but we're not actually doing anything. And the methods that we're trying to gain public support, this isn't working in this specific context. Maybe we should reevaluate what we're actually doing. I know It's Going Down faced a bit of backlash for posting that critique, but I think the critique's actually worth reading. Are there any other thoughts on the Atlanta thing before I move on to the Stop Line 3 stuff?
No, other than to note that I think the best brisket I've ever had came from Atlanta.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll probably be visiting Atlanta in the near future.
I may be there with you. In which case I'll get some more motherfucking brisket.
Yeah.
It was actually a fun story. We were road tripping through town, me and another friend in another car, and we were talking over radios, and a trucker got on the channel we were on, because we were talking about where to get barbecue, and he told us where to go. It was neat. It was like an actual nice like moment of CB radio connection. Like this guy was just scanning the waves and found us and was like, "Oh, I can tell you where to go." Anyway, continue, Garrison. That was completely unrelated to stopping Line 3.
So next thing is earlier, I think in September, maybe August, I forget. It's been a while. We posted 2 episodes about me visiting the Stop Line 3 protests and the Earth First camp, and a lot of stuff has happened since then. So the main thing is that the pipeline has been finished now, and is basically is ready to be operated, or it probably already has some operation. It's unclear how much is being used right now, but it is done construction. It doubles the capacity of the original pipeline. It's going to be doing like 760,000 barrels of oil a day. So it carves out land through wetlands where people grow wild rice and do hunting. So overall, the past few months, police arrested over 900 people, and there's been a lot of like felony charges specifically for locking down, which is pretty new because they're using like, felony theft charges for people just locking down to equipment.
Yeah, that is an unfortunate escalation.
Yeah. So by the time we posted our Stop Line 3 episodes, we kind of already figured this was going to be the result. That's kind of how I ended the episode, saying there's been all this resistance, but probably it's going to get built. And there's other things that we can learn from this movement going on into the future. But the new developments that have happened, I did mention in the episodes how much Enbridge was directly paying cops. That was something we already knew that was happening. But there was an article by The Guardian that really gave a lot of new information around how much police involvement there is with Enbridge. Like they are actually coordinating a lot. So overall, Enbridge has reimbursed U.S. police almost $2.5 million for arresting and surveying protesters. Also paying for like food, lodging, gas. So like they're not just paying wages; they're paying like for extra stuff as well. So at least $2.5 million has been paid from the Canadian Oil Company. And that includes officer training, police patrol routes, surveillance, all this kind of stuff. The one interesting thing that was noted in the article is that the company at Enbridge meets daily with police officers to discuss intelligence gathering and patrols. And when Enbridge wants protesters removed, it directly calls or sends letters to police. So they actually like coordinate when to actually get police involved during protests, and they have at least daily information meetings. The one other interesting thing, besides just directly paying them for food, for training, equipment, and the coordination between Enbridge and people being on the ground, is how much that the Enbridge paid for proactive safety patrols and specific officer surveillance following alleged activists home. So they would trail specific cars for a long time and try to do in-person surveillance on specific people they thought were activists. And all of this time was paid for by Enbridge and was being coordinated with Enbridge. So it's not just, paying for training, it's not just for paying for equipment, it's specific surveillance of certain people. And that is, I don't know, that's something that we did not really know the depths of that for sure, but it's pretty messed up. I know we suspected some of this coordination before, like when we talked about police showing up to the Stop Line 3 camp and blocking off access to the road. This was at the same day that drilling under the river was just being finished. And we suspected, there's Enbridge is obviously talking with police to prevent people from leaving so that they can finish up this specific drilling project. That was pretty obvious to us at the scene. And now we have, extra confirmation that, they do meet daily to coordinate these types of things. So it's good to have that extra confirmation of the stuff we already suspected and stuff we already kind of put together through experience. But now we have court documents and records showing the extent of the coordination.
All right. Well, we'll talk about terrorism, but you know who else is a terrorist?
Oh boy.
The products and services that support this podcast
are boy. All right.
In a good way, you know?
Uh-huh.
Kind of.
Okay, all right.
Sometimes.
Well, it's complicated. All right. Do ads. Just run ads. Stop.
Oh, Sophie, it'll probably be funnier if you bleep out the name of the terrorist organization.
This is how we pick up from the ad break. Is when you're saying that.
So, Garrison, we got some critiques that came in to the old Newsline, by which I mean people DM'd me on Reddit which I
Reddit on Discord.
Yeah, I never respond. I almost never respond. It's nothing against people. I just don't like being communicated with.
Yeah.
No
but,
shit.
Too many people ask me to send messages to you. I'm like, no,
Yeah, it's annoying.
Yeah, Garrison, you're not my secretary.
I know. I'm not like. That's not what I'm.
Yes.
Garrison, welcome to the last 3 years of my life.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, but that's funny, Sophie.
Oh.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Robert?
I don't know. There were people who were like, hey, I don't know if you know this, but Earth First has a problematic history with like eco-fascism and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I got some messages like that too.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. They definitely are an organization that has said things in the past that I don't agree with.
There's been specific people who do organizing with them that don't have great beliefs, specifically around like, a lot of like in the old green movements, there's been, a lot of like transphobia, some like racism.
It's not because they're the green movements. Like all left spaces deal with versions of these issues.
And there's a variety of stuff, not like respecting like indigenous people. That's been a thing. But the specific term eco-fascism, I believe, is incorrect. Because they don't advocate for the genocide of a specific group. And they don't have like far right populist policies. So like you can have bad opinions and bad ideas, and you can actually be racist without actually being fascist, especially eco-fascist. So I feel like people throw that word around a lot, and they don't actually know what it means. But what were you specifically referring to, Robert?
I'm trying to find the message here, but
because I got a message saying that Earth First is bad because they're anti-natalist, and that means they're fascist, which isn't.
Yeah, I definitely got that. Yeah,
which isn't actually like. I'm just going to disagree with that because I don't think antinatalism equates fascism, especially antinatalism for like something.
And antinatalism is basically saying don't make people.
Maybe we should
don't make additional.
Maybe we
people.
should stop having more kids right now because we have a lot of problems to deal with, and maybe we shouldn't be having 3 kids.
Which is not, it's not a take. I'm not an antinatalist. I don't actually disagree with that take, though, but I think it's more in the line of like the most fundamental of all human desires for the majority of the population is to make more people.
Which is kind of why I like antinatalism, because it has that thing that's opposite to what a lot of humans' natural reaction. And like, no one's forcing, antinatalists don't want to force you to be antinatalist. They just want to bring up this as an idea.
Yeah, and I think it's a valuable idea to discuss, and I don't think you're embracing like the massacre of human beings or genocide in any way by saying like I think it'd be best if we didn't make any more people.
I'm not planning to have
arguable point.
Yeah, I'm not planning to have any kids because I don't see why I would, especially when there's so many like children that can be adopted.
Now, Garrison, we talked
families.
about you having kids so we could experiment with making them blue.
This is a separate conversation that we talked about last night.
Conversation.
We're not talking about that
involving
on the pod.
colloidal silver.
No, we are not talking about this on the pod.
Okay. We'll just include that tantalizing hint. Yeah. I also just think in general, when we talk about a group that's had a long history and a specific thing they're doing in the present, this has happened in other situations where people are like, well, they did this, or one of them said this, and there's a couple of things I feel about that. For one thing, it's like it's entirely possible that the people doing the thing in the present day have nothing to do with the people 20 years ago.
No, yeah, like most of the people at the Earth First gathering were like in their 20s or around my age. Like they weren't in Earth First in 1980. Like that's not like.
So I feel like silly about kind of making them be held accountable for something somebody else said under a similar banner decades ago.
And on the podcast, I talked about how like people at the Earth First gathering like talked about this stuff. Like the people talked about Earth First's like history and how they haven't handled some issues very well. There was a massive effort for this gathering to uplift and make sure everyone focuses on indigenous voices. Like they invited over multiple indigenous groups to give talks on green resistance and like land back. Like that was a big focus of like making sure that this actually is something that is heard, because people know like this is something important. This is something that actually should be done.
And there are, I think in general, when we talk about like holding organizations and individuals accountable for their past, what matters is like a mix of what they did and what they're doing. So obviously, if Earth First had been saying 20 years ago, we need to wipe out all the Jews, I would be like, I wouldn't
no,
care
no.
what they were saying now. You know,
Yeah.
it'd be like, yeah, you can't really come back from that. If you want to do a completely different thing, it needs to be a new organization.
You don't, yeah.
But they weren't. And I'm
No.
not saying they were. I'm just making an example. But like, as a rule, I think we should embrace the fact that organizations and people can change throughout time and be better than they were in the past. And learn from mistakes and flaws. And I feel pretty unwilling to condemn individuals or organizations for the mistakes of their past, although that is dependent upon the kind of mistake and the harm that it caused.
Yeah,
obviously.
and how they address it in the future. Because like a lot of these, because like it wasn't like Earth First as an overall organization; it was specific people they were affiliated with. Like specifically, Edward Abbey has said some not great things around different social issues, and his books were extremely influential on the beginning of Green Resistance. But that's something people talk about now. Like that's something that is like discussed and debated. And he was like, even in the 80s and 90s, he was like kicked out of Earth First gatherings for kind of being a loser, like for having these bad views. We're like, yeah, we probably shouldn't have you here anymore. Leave, go away. So like that was something that was even talked about back then as well. That isn't just like a modern thing.
Yeah. And I think in general, there's a couple of things. Number one, whenever we talk about like an organization in a specific context, they're doing this, that doesn't mean we're embracing everything they've done. And number two, whenever we talk about the history of a movement or a group, I hope nobody ever takes that as like, here is the authoritative stance on the history of this thing. Like it's when we talked about the Black Panthers. There's a bunch of stuff we left out that's very important. My hope with those episodes and my hope with anything we do is that it like inspires people to want to learn more and read more. And we're giving them a basis of understanding that they can use to expand their knowledge on an important topic. So please, we are, there's like one thing collectively that Garrison and I have any kind of expertise on. And outside of that, you should not take anything we say as like, here's the comprehensive history of this. Because it's I understand one thing, and it's how the internet makes people shitty.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, I mean that was this whole thing was something I thought about when writing these episodes, is how much to include of this stuff, and I did not feel like it was super important to discuss this stuff because it wasn't relevant to the topic of Stop Line 3.
I think you did
and
a
it
great
wasn't
job.
relevant to the topic of like the current ongoing green resistance. If we want to do like a history of green activism, then yes, this is something that would be would come up.
And I think like at some point we probably should do like,
absolutely
talk about the just like John Muir and like all of that shit. But like
there's a ton of stuff we want to talk about that we haven't yet because it's a daily show, and my God, give us some fucking time, people. Speaking of Edward Abbey, you know what sells quality monkey wrenches?
Okay, all right, that's fine. That's okay.
The maybe one of our sponsors. It's
Hopefully.
possible. I hope so.
Ace Hardware.
Ace Hardware. If Ace Hardware sponsoring us, they do sell. You can get some good monkey wrenches from Ace Hardware. Quality wrenching.
For fixing your faucet.
For fixing your faucet. So go get wrench pilled and then listen to the rest of the show.
Whoa, we're back. We just had a good discussion about what we're going to talk about, and we realized that it wasn't after the ad break. So here we are. In early September, we had episodes about both California's climate and the ongoing recall election against Gavin Newsom. So a few days after our episodes dropped, I think like the day the second one dropped was election day.
Yep.
We got the results in faster than what I was expecting. And Newsom did handily beat Larry Elder with like 60,
not
60,
even close.
Yeah, so
not
people
close.
voted 61% no and like 38% yes. So Newsom did a decent job in pushing off Elder. So this whole recall process costed California taxpayers $276 million.
Jesus. Well, it's not like we needed the money for anything else, Garrison. Come on.
Yeah. So a few takeaways.
What else
from
were we going to spend it on?
Literally
firefighters?
Literally anything else.
Water?
Giving houses.
California needs water and firefighters, Garrison. Come on.
Giving houses to people who need houses. I don't know.
No.
Yeah, so takeaways from this, the recall process still should absolutely be amended.
It should stupid as hell.
It should require more than 12% signatures of the last voter turnout, and the government should be requiring to get if you're going to be elected into government, you should be required to get a majority of votes not just a plurality of a specific, sect. So there's the whole. We talked about the specific reasons why it was bad in those episodes. Those are still valid. Those are still relevant because there's still the same issues.
Yeah, and none of the fact that this turned out well had anything to do with the Democratic Party, who very nearly bungled it.
No, and it doesn't really impact. It doesn't impact the California's climate issues so much, and like just because Newsom's in office doesn't mean they're going to get much better. There's still things that he needs to be pushed on to make the climate a little bit more habitable in the meantime.
It means that we will continue stumbling towards a cliff rather than running
sprinting
off of it. Yeah.
Yep. So
which is generally what voting for Democrats means.
Yeah.
I will say it's interesting to me that it doesn't seem like you can get the vote was rigged thing to work unless the election is like kind of close initially.
This is the next thing I was going to talk about.
Okay.
Yeah, because like in the week before the election, Fox News, Republican Party, and Larry Elder, and even Trump were really starting to ramp up this idea that if Elder loses, that means the election was rigged. This was like they were really pushing this hard, and spreading it, like they were giving links to it, a website like before he lost, even to be like, if when I lose, use this website. It was like, okay, that's
was very funny.
That's weird. But on the night of the election, Elder seems to kind of climb down from the inflammatory rhetoric around the election. In his concession speech, he told supporters, "Let's be gracious in defeat." So once the actual results were in, he really climbed that down. So we can read into that. But the other thing I want us to read into here is that could this rhetoric around if we lose, that means it was rigged, could that disenfranchise Republican voters from even showing up if they believe that all elections will be stolen from them?
God, I hope so.
Will that mean that there'll be less Republican turnout if they think that it doesn't matter? So that's the other side of things. It's like I'm not sure if the other side effects that this rhetoric could have.
Yeah, there's an interesting during the last election, like national election cycle, there was a bunch of interviews with people who weren't voting in Florida, and I thought it was really interesting because there were several people they talked to who were like, "Yeah, I don't vote because last time I voted was 2000 and they stole the election," which literally and I'd say that, like,
I get it,
yeah, like I think it is slightly different when like 2000. Literally was stolen. Literally, there was the bricks. Like Roger Stone. Roger Stone led a riot to stop like the votes from being counted. Like whatever weird Bush.
Yeah.
I think it was people got like struck. Like a bunch of people with like vaguely black names got like their names struck off the like the voting rolls. Like there was a lot of but and I don't know if it'll if the effect can work that strongly when it's like completely bullshit, which I think that's it's an interesting question.
I don't know. It's hard to say because it's unclear whether the voter turnout on because there were times where they were polling like 50-50 between Newsom and Elder, and it's unclear. I think definitely the big advertising push that corporate donors gave to Newsom in the month before the election did help get Democratic voter turnout. Like people voting for Newsom.
Yeah, getting people scared about fucking Larry Elder as the governor was not ineffective.
That very much worked. So that did increase turnout there, but I don't know because with the whole election being stolen rhetoric, that can both increase Republican voter turnout, and there's also the side effect now where maybe it could decrease it because they're just disenfranchised about this concept. But this is kind of just speculation at this point. I don't have actual data backing up this claim right now. This is just something that I thought about while writing this write-up. I'm like, I wonder if this could be a contributing factor in the future. People really feel like they're always going to lose. Maybe they just not even are going to bother. But it's hard to say. It's like, and the main reason why Elder lost wasn't due to Newsom's strengths. It was because Elder is completely it was the most
wildly
extreme,
unqualified.
Yeah, wildly unqualified, and one of the more extreme candidates running. And yes, he did get a lot of support among Republicans, but among moderates and people, left of center in terms of an American spectrum, they're like, yeah, no, this is going to be a disaster if he gets elected, and that's the main reason why he didn't. It's not due to Newsom being great. But I mean, Sophie did mention a few things that Newsom has done since then. Sophie, do you want to say the specific details just so I don't have to look?
Yeah, Sophie's famously a big Newsom fan, so.
So not. Come on. Not to give Newsom credit because this is like an obvious right thing to do situation, but at the beginning of October, the Senate Bill 796 was signed into law. It was a unanimous vote, and Newsom signed off on it to give back Bruce's Beach, which was owned by a black family, Willa and Charles Bruce, back in 1924. Their land was illegally taken away from them. It's a beachfront plot in Manhattan Beach, and I signed into law to give it back. So that's cool.
That is good. I mean, yeah.
Good. More of that should be done. I mean, that is kind of the basis of like, that is one side of land back is just giving land back to people who used to have it.
Yeah.
Of course, this isn't specifically tied to like indigenous stuff, but I've seen people make that same comparison for like, we should just be doing this more in general to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that was done.
It's also now illegal to remove a condom without consent in California, which is...
Wait, what?
Yeah,
Really?
Garrison, you're going to have to change a lot of things about how you have sex with Californians.
It's the first state to prohibit...
That is real bizarre.
To prohibit
You didn't
removing
realize
a condom
that was
without
legal?
permission. Yeah, during intercourse. It's the first state to do that, first of all.
Huh.
Yeah.
And it's wild because under any reasonable definition, that's rape.
No, I mean, yeah.
It's 100%. It's just rape.
It's absolutely rape.
California also now requires menstrual products in public schools. So that's bare minimum and grade.
Oh,
that
great.
is good. That is
wow. I didn't realize that it happened.
Yeah, and I want to be clear here. I'm not giving Newsom credit for this, but if he had lost the recall election, none of this would be happening.
No, it's nice that I'm sure some of this was him kind of providing a sop to the people who lined up to stop the recall, and those are good things that were done.
And I think that's sort of an important thing to understand about when politicians occasionally do good things. It's like they don't do good things because they want to do them. They do things that benefit from you because they're either in some way scared of you or it's because they need to buy you off. And that is a legitimate way that good things happen.
I've got a couple other there's been a lot signed in recently, so I got a couple other ones that I think are relevant to our show. California will now streamline extend assisted death law. So
that's good.
That reduces the time until terminal patients can choose to be given fatal drugs. So
good.
Starting January 1st, the waiting period required time a patient makes separate oral requests for medication will drop to 48 hours, down from the current minimum 15 days.
That is
That's
good.
Pretty rad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm very supportive of that.
Yep.
I mean, I mean, we'll see if this actually is a thing.
hard.
There's a lot.
It's hard to be like worse than Larry Elder.
Yeah, that's my point. This one definitely would not get through for Larry Elder.
No.
California enacts law to strip badges from bad officers, like very vaguely written.
Yeah,
there.
we'll see how it works.
That is very vague, but we'll see what happens. And like none of that stuff would have happened under a Larry Elder thing. And I am surprised at that some of those things actually got through because I'm surprised that Democratic politicians would actually vote for those things to be put into office. That's why I was like shocked.
And very
specifically at like the condom thing.
Absolutely, and very important.
I was not expecting that to go through.
Newsom signs legislation to extend to-go cocktails.
Wait, all right, that's fine. Sure, okay,
come on,
fine. More drinking. and driving.
Where are my to-go cocktail heads? Sorry.
All right, so at least Larry Elder's not in office. There's still a lot of climate issues, and maybe this rhetoric around stealing the election's not going to work every single time they do it. That's kind of nice. That's the main things that I was going to talk about.
Cool. And it is. I mean, one of the things that people are talking about in a lot of the spaces I generally agree with is like the foolishness of voting as harm reduction. And there's been a lot of, if you want to believe that it isn't, there's been a lot of information coming out from the Biden administration that will support that belief.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing right now in California is it can be like these are not. None of this is going to fundamentally change the major problems that are confronting us, but a bunch of those things are going to life's going to be easier for some little girls whose families don't have much money. Life got easier for that one family who got their land back. Potentially it's going to be easier to get bad police officer or to get particularly bad police officers off the street. And that's not nothing. Like when we say voting can be, and I'm not saying that it usually is, but when it can reduce harm, that's what it means. It means that some bad things that would be worse are not as bad because of this. Not that everything is better. A lot of stuff will be the same and is the same in California. Like ecologically, nothing yet has really fundamentally changed, but some shit's a little easier for certain groups of people as a result of some stuff that just happened that wouldn't have happened.
Specifically, I think the getting more like contraceptive products and menstrual products inside public schools is one of literally the best things we can do. Like for the whole country, that is like something that if that was required in every public school, that would make so many people's lives better. That is a ridiculous degree.
Yeah. Significantly reduces harm in a specific way. And I think that just because it's not going to stop us all from burning up. But that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile.
Yeah.
So cool. Those were the 3 stories that I wanted to give some updates for. Because I know, there were changes happened, very soon after posting those episodes. I still think the California ones are worth listening to because they do lay out a lot of stuff around California's climate, and the specific weird stuff that it has with specific weird things it has with its election process. I think the Line 3 episodes are going to be pretty good to go back to as well. And then I add the specific Cop City thing in Atlanta. That is the stuff that it's going to be the most ongoing thing still, because that's still going to be an ongoing project. So I'm sure we'll come back to the Cop City at different points throughout the next few months. So that's the updates. Any closing notes from either Christopher, Robert, or Sophie?
Yeah, just I do. Well, excuse me, sir.
Okay, all right, Sophie.
Sir,
go.
Just a reminder, we've said this earlier in the episode that we're just giving you brief snippets about this stuff. There's a lot of really good articles online that go deep into these things, and we'll post our sources on the website.
Yep.
Yeah. We do a good job, I think, most of the time.
Patting ourselves on the back, Chris.
Yes, but
we do a good job.
We're great.
Yeah, we're the only heroes in
really
the world.
Like
I think
us.
that's fair to say. Absolutely.
But do not have a podcast be the only source of information.
No, absolutely.
That you have about a thing.
Don't listen just.
I
to
am
us.
begging you.
No, for the love of God, listen to. If you want more of a left perspective that goes in some directions we don't, It's Going Down is a lovely place to check out. Margaret Killjoy's Live Like the World is Dying, St. Andrew's YouTube channel. He does some really incredible stuff. There's all sorts of good people out there. And then also history books, more than anything, history books.
History books were the thing that radicalized me.
Yeah. If you want to read more about the Newsom notable laws signed recently, the KCRA in Sacramento did a really good breakdown article.
Yeah.
That I'll post on the website.
Oh, sorry, Sophie.
It's okay.
And as a note, we will be doing more episodes like this over time as stories that we cover have additional things happen to them. This is we don't want to just be dropping a story and then ignoring whatever happens next. Sometimes that'll mean following up with people that we're talking to on the ground, but we are trying to keep you updated on the things that we think are important, even when they end in a broadly positive sense or whatever.
And lastly, what was the name of that brisket place in Atlanta? Because I'm sure people are going to ask about it.
Oh, I don't remember. It was some shitty little place in the middle of South Atlanta, in a fucking strip mall.
That was really helpful.
I don't remember, Sophie. It was 11 years ago. I don't remember yesterday.
It was the best brisket you've ever had, and
it was.
And you don't.
But the best, if you know anything about good barbecue, the best barbecue you ever have is either cooked by your uncle or is cooked in some shitty little place with a bathroom that wouldn't pass a code inspection.
Yeah. That is true. The more codes it violates, the better the brisket. Anyway,
if you see the chef actively shit on the grill, that means it's going to be incredible.
Jesus Christ.
Anyways,
Twitter and Instagram, What Happened Here Pod and Cool Zone Media. Subscribe to the feed and leave a 5-star review. That's it. Don't shit on your brisket grill. Don't
shit on everything.
All right.
Bye.
Shit life.
Bye.
In
In 2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, this is Jo Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom-loving and different perspectives, and I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Echard, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Please search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Garrison, is that good? Is that the show?
Nope, just keep going, though.
Okay, well, It Could Happen Here is the show. That atonal noise is my introduction this week because I'm a hack and a fraud. Who isn't a hack and a fraud is our guest this week, St. Andrew. St. Andrew, you are a solar punk anarchist from Trinidad. You have a YouTube channel where you talk about solar punk. You talk about stuff like seed bombing. Yeah, I'm just very excited to have you on the show because I'm a big fan of your YouTube channel.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Big fan of your work as well.
Andrew, I kind of wanted to start with why solar punk is important because I think it's easy for folks who just kind of skim it to see it. It's just like, oh, it's an aesthetic. It's maybe an art style or a fiction style. Maybe something that's neat, but not something that has like a lot of inherent value to people trying to change the world. And obviously you disagree with that. I disagree with it too. A quote I keep coming back to again and again is, one from Werner Herzog in the 1970s. And it was something along the lines of, I think that without better myths, we're destined to go the way of the dinosaurs.
Right. It reminds me actually of, I forget his name right now, but there's this excellent book called The Truth About Stories. And I think what it really emphasizes throughout the book is the importance of stories and how stories impact how we navigate the world. Which is why I sort of embraced solarpunk, as a story that we can work with going forward.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important to have better stories, better myths, because for one thing, I think where the left falls down a lot is not having is accurately diagnosing the problems without providing a better look at the future. And when the problems when the people who do kind of propose solutions, it's often not in a way people can feel. One of the benefits that the right has, that fascism has, is that they're very good at providing people with myths and providing people with kind of a fictional look at their idealized world that draws people in. You can laugh at the right.
They have a lot of people that work on like meta narratives, and that's very, very core to their ideology.
So I guess where I'd like to start with you, Andrew, because this is kind of the first time I think we've really talked about solar punk on this show. Even though from the beginning, before any of these episodes dropped, this was always a central part of our discussion about what the show was going to be. Would you kind of provide an introduction to what solar punk is for our listeners?
Sure. So I would say that solarpunk is a vision of the future that places emphasis on the existing world and how we get to that future from where we are now. So it emphasizes the need for environmental sustainability, for self-governance, and for autonomy and social justice. It emphasizes the need for, human and ecocentric ends to really be in sync. And it aims to really heal the current rift between humanity and nature. It also recognizes, of course, that there isn't this binary between climate change happens and climate change doesn't happen. Rather, it understands that how we navigate it will have a variety of consequences, and some will be positive, some will be negative, but it's up to us to really shape that.
Yeah, and it's I want to drill into a couple of facets of that, but I want to quickly plug one of your YouTube videos for folks who kind of want a more involved explanation and background. You have a video called "What is Solarpunk" on your channel, St. Andrewism, like Andrew ISM, that I think is a fantastic introduction, not just to like the aesthetics of solarpunk, but some of the practical kind of expressions of it. And two of the ones you list as like examples of here's what this is like actual praxis, and not just an aesthetic, is seed bombing. And then you talk about this very interesting kind of like terracotta air conditioning, which I think is neat because it's one of the problems that I think with kind of some versions of particularly kind of on the more liberal end of solarpunk imagining is just sort of like ways of replacing, ways of gaining the same kind of consumptive benefits that exist. I guess not even solarpunk, like greenwashing, right?
Greenwashing,
like greenwashing. Like here, let's get the same consumptive benefits we get from capitalism.
Skyscrapers with
just
trees
with
on them.
Yeah, skyscrapers with
same
trees
level
on
of consumerism, same level of destructive, extractive practices, but we have some flowers and some trees. So
yeah, and that's not enough. But at the same time, there are things that aren't like air conditioning contributes massively to climate change. It's also not a luxury. Like if you live in a place where it's 120 degrees a lot of the summer, that's not a luxury.
Yeah, this is coming from someone in a tropical country.
Yeah,
it's definitely a necessity.
Yeah, so I wonder if you could talk about kind of those two, or if you have different ones you'd like to pick, but just kind of what you see as sort of the praxis expressions of solarpunk, sort of beyond the aesthetic, although we're going to drill into the aesthetic some too, because I also think that's important.
Right, so I think some of my favorite manifestations of solarpunk in a practical context are things like guerrilla gardening. Guerrilla gardening is probably the biggest one because it's one that someone could literally pick up and do today or tomorrow. As soon as they hear about it, learn about it, just get some clay, get some seeds, and put those things together. And as you're walking home or walking to the store, just toss them wherever there's some free dirt. So that's a fun one. There's also, of course, things like a little bit more involved, like community gardening and particularly forest gardening, because that will provide a level of food autonomy and agency for people who have been alienated for a long time from the process of food production. There are also practices like coppicing or coppicing, and it's like a way to produce lumber without chopping down a whole set of trees. So you are able to get the wood from the trees, but the tree remains alive. There is also things like, of course, solar-powered technology, whether it be algae-based windows that, extract energy from the sun, or solar sails, or solar ovens, or like the terracotta air conditioning, which, by the way, I learned recently can't really work in a humid environment.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are a lot of different opportunities there. Also, there are things like, tool shares and maker spaces and seed libraries, all different ways to sort of bring it into fruition. Solar punk, that is.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that's really valuable. I'm interested in part sort of your attitude on what let me think about how to phrase this. What do you think are kind of the things, as we talk about sort of the things that can be at least potentially replaced with less extractive, less consumptive methods, as sort of an example of solar punk praxis is replacing those things. There's also things that we're not going to be able to have if we actually want to live in a more sustainable future that doesn't contribute to some of the nightmares that we're all going to be increasingly facing. You're, and again, I think it's telling that so much of kind of the future fantasies that are written by people who come from, my part of the world, the United States, focus on like kind of post-scarcity methods of guaranteeing the continuation of consumption just through, in some cases, like fantastic methods, magical 3D printers and the like. You come from a very different part of the world, very different perspective. What do you see as the things that like we're going to have to give up?
Coming from a country that is actually reliant on oil and natural gas production, we have to get rid of cars.
Yeah.
We definitely, absolutely have to get rid of cars. Freighter ships as well. And really the whole way that, global supply chains are structured right now. Not to say that there won't be any sort of global sharing of resources in the future, but the way that it's happening right now, it can't continue to go on. We can't continue to structure our cities and our lives around cars, and other methods of gas guzzling transportation, because we're literally going to run out. And we've known this for a long time, but it's nearing, the day is nearing closer and closer. And we have to find a way to do without it.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of things that are important. One of them is you can't just say we have to stop global trade and global travel, because the people have sought and done that for as long as there have been people in one form or another. It's a fundamentally human thing. But there are aspects of it, like, expecting that every kind of fruit and vegetable will be available year round, which is certainly a thing that we in the United States expect. That's not part of a realistic future. And if it's part of the future, then it's only going to be part of the future for an ever shrinking chunk of the country. And you can see that in sort of, or of the West. And you can see that in kind of, the like what we're dealing with right now with like the supply line shortages and failures, and like one of the, I think, the symbols of how far we have to go in my country is the degree to which people are freaking out by the fact that Christmas presents might be late, let alone being like, yeah, you might not be able to buy coffee ever or all the time. You know, you might not be able to get tomatoes in December.
Which reminds me, I think one benefit to guerrilla gardening, and that's also the mindset, is as you learn to sow, you also learn to reap, right? So a lot of people who get into guerrilla gardening also end up getting into foraging. And there are apps and stuff that you could download that allow you to, you know, learn how to identify plants in your area. And you'd be surprised the number of plants in your area that are, you know, useful for teas or for salads or for whatever purposes that can be used as replacements. Well, I'm not sure if they could replace coffee, but they could be beneficial in recognizing how we have to live with our local ecosystems, basically.
Yeah, and a big, you know, when you talk about learning how to live with our ecosystem, stuff like planting forest gardens and the like, or food forests, I think is the term. I think something that has to be discussed is the matter of indigenous sovereignty, especially when we're talking about, you know, it's not just, you know, North America. A lot of chunks of the globe, indigenous people had spent, you know, in some cases, thousands of generations setting forests up in order to sustainably produce food. And when colonialism arrived, that was often just seen as like, oh, these are wild places for us to extract or tear down and replace with monocultures, you know, single crops. And so a big part of actually building back that capacity, the capacity of us to survive off of the food that can sustainably grow where we live, is looking back to those indigenous methods and also, you know, giving back land in a lot of cases. And yeah, I that's something you talk about in your videos that I think is really important to explain to people.
Yeah, I mean, there's really is no way to separate the violent and oppressive institution of colonialism with the ecocidal nature of modern states. You know, those two are deeply intertwined, deeply married together. And so you can't fight climate change without addressing the issue of sovereignty, of indigenous sovereignty and land back.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've been up hunting on Mount Hood with a friend who went to school for like forestry management. And as we were driving, we had to drive through a chunk of the reservation in order to get to the BLM land where we're able to hunt. And he pointed it out, and once he did, it was immediately obvious just how different the land under indigenous control looked from the land, you know, just feet away that was being managed by the federal government, in terms of like how much better the forest management was, how much smarter it was managed in order to reduce the chances of like a ladder fire that actually kills, you know, the trees and whatnot. There's this whole thing blowing up on Twitter right now where you've got a chunk of Marxists who are trying to frame land back as just like shifting ownership of resources, which I think is really missing the point.
What I find interesting about Twitter is that the exact same discourses are repeated over and over and over again. So I remember this exact conversation happening around this time last year, around April last year, earlier this year as well. It's just the same discourses get recycled over and over again. And it's reached a point for me where I realized that these people don't want to learn about land back, what it really means, because they are invested in the structure as it exists, and they don't want to have to interrogate that. So, yeah, just found that to be an interesting thing of note.
Yeah, and it's frustrating. I guess that acts as like a general description of Twitter discourse, but
certainly does.
Yeah, I think it's telling the degree to which people, even on the left, treat it as a fantasy as opposed to doggedly pragmatic, and proven so, like proven by like you can read UN reports that will essentially say land back in the space of a 500-page study on how indigenous land management functions a great deal better than a lot of the stuff that's like centralized by the federal government. We're like, our federal government is terrible at land management, and it's part of the problem. And I think one of the things that excites me about solar punk as an aesthetic and idea is getting back to this relationship with the land, as opposed to talking about just preserving it, as talking about managing it, because none of the land that people live on is like wild in the sense that people mean it as. It's been cultivated.
And that's the thing, right? The whole philosophy of land preservation, as was taken up by the U.S. government with the whole, you can stop forest fires kind of thing, ended up leading to more forest fires down the line, because we have a role in the ecosystem. We're not just there to stand back from afar and just observe it. So when we don't do our part to manage the underbrush and whatnot and clear it away and exercise, control fires, well, we end up in the situation we're in today. Cultivation, not just sterile preservation.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that you talk about because one of the more frustrating discourses, this is not just a Twitter thing, this has been going on for years, is the discourse around GMO crops. And usually, I would say like the two most commonly heard sides are GMOs are bad because, Monsanto cancer, whatever, or GMOs are good, end thought. And the thing that you point out, which is, I think, the accurate take, is GMOs, the preponderance of evidence says that, like, there's nothing inherently dangerous about genetically modified crops, but the way in which they're often used in order to create these massive monocultures is really toxic. So there's a lot of promise for GMOs in terms of keeping our existence on this planet sustainable. But what's not sustainable is the kind of industrialized agriculture where you have 10,000 acres of one thing, which just doesn't happen in nature.
Exactly. And if you look at how genetic modification took place prior to, all advancements in genetic modification technology, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds, of varieties of just corn that were present in the Americas prior to colonization. A lot of those varieties were wiped out or were suppressed in favor of these monocultures. But if we're able to cultivate a diversity of these crops and maybe bring some of them back through genetic modification, that will really help us with, food resilience in a world with an increasingly unpredictable climate.
Yeah. I think I think you said it perfectly. I want to move back to kind of what I introduced the episode with, which is talking about the value of fiction and myth making in a very pragmatic sense. I guess I'll start by saying I think one of the clearest signs of the danger that we're in and how toxic our society has gotten, and I am speaking from a primarily U.S.-centric standpoint here, but I don't think it's unique to the United States, is the extent to which...
Trust me, as the saying goes, when the U.S. sneeze, Trinidad catch a cold. So anytime there's some phenomenon happening in the U.S., there are the copycats down here as well. So,
and I do think this is pretty global. I mean, you see it in like South Korean films and just all over.
I know what you're going to say, yeah.
The obsession with apocalypse. And when we go to the future, it's always a dystopia. There's a degree to which we've almost forgotten how to imagine utopia, or even not just utopia, just a way of living that is an improvement in a lot of ways, a future that's better.
We've forgotten to do both utopian fiction and any just kind of like positive fiction in a lot of ways. I mean, it's understandable because the world is kind of terrible right now in a lot of ways, but there's been utopian fiction inside other terrible worlds as well. I think just the modern interconnected media sphere has really rewarded this type of like dystopian and collapse-based apocalypse fiction.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's worth interrogating why, but it is a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, and it is. I think it's important to note it's not entirely based in how fucked up things are. Because like when the first Star Trek came out, we were at like the height of the Cold War. Things were terrible.
There was a lot of utopian fiction during World War II.
During World War II. I will always be impressed by the fact that Gene Roddenberry saw it as incredibly important both to be like, okay, well, in the future, like in the middle of the civil rights movement, in the future, we will have overcome like racism, but not just that, but like I'm gonna stick a Russian on the bridge too, because nations are going to end as a concept, and like this stuff won't matter. And that kind of utopian fiction, at least at the scale of popularity that, you know, Star Trek was in its time, just isn't present anymore. And that's tremendously worrying to me. And I see a lot of hope in solar punk for that. I guess for starters, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, and your interest in Andrew, what you think is like the pragmatic value of positive fiction that imagines a better world.
Yeah, so I've done probably I think I've done like 2 videos on solar punk so far. 2 major videos on solar punk, as well as a smaller video, 2 other smaller videos. And what I've seen in the comments and in the general social media reaction again and again is solar punk saved my life. You know, solar punk has given me hope. You know, I was slipping into despair, but this video really gave me a jump start to try something new and to start afresh and to pursue action as opposed to just lying down and taking whatever comes next. And that is it for me. You know, I think the fact that solar punk offers like an energizing vision. It's not just a vision, it's an energizing vision, because in every step of the way, it shows what you can do. You know, when you look at solar punk art, or you look at the small but growing genre of solar punk literary media, or you know, you look at, well, there's not that many solar punk video games right now, but hopefully there will be in the future. When you look at the various forms of solar punk media that are coming out and people's responses to them, you see that it's not like, as you're all mentioning, like Star Trek, where it's all this far out technology that we can only aspire to for now.
Yeah.
You know, solar punk is something that you can literally put in your backyard or your balcony or your home or your school or your community. You know, you could put these things in place like from now, you know, and you could incorporate it into your politics as, you know, as they are. And they could also help to push your politics forward, you know, because through solar punk, we can open up discussions about, okay, so how do we ensure that people live comfortably within the parameters of, you know, the Earth's carrying capacity? You know, you open up discussions about indigenous sovereignty. You open up discussions about the relationship between the global North and the global South, and responsibility with regard to our response to climate change. Well, you open up a lot of different discussions through the realm of solar punk. It energizes people, as I said. And yeah, I think that is its pragmatic purpose. It doesn't stand alone, of course, but it is a driving force.
Yeah. Would you kind of give out a list of, if people are, you know, if this is someone's first introduction to the concept of solar punk, what is some reading you want to draw people towards? What is some fiction? Like, I know you mentioned The Dispossessed by Le Guin, right?
Yes.
Which often gets cited. Yeah, I'm interested in kind of other recommendations you might have for our listeners. Re that.
Right. So I'm still getting into the genre myself, so I don't have too many recommendations. There are some decent short story collections, like Sun Vault by a couple different authors. There's also Multi-Species Cities, Solar Punk, Urban Futures. And the one I read most recently was Ecotopia, which is much older than all the others. It's actually a book that was published in 1975. And not all aspects of its politics are things I agree with, but I think for a first it was one of the first of its kind in that sort of eco-utopian genre that really laid out what this society would look like. The book is structured in a series of novel entries and notebook reports by a journalist from the United States who has gone to this country called Ecotopia, which is sort of where the Pacific Northwest states are. And he's basically he's going to different parts of the country and breaking down how they have lived and how they have decided to structure their lives. And even though not every aspect of it is one that I would want to see implemented, I still think that it really sparks the imagination, really gets you thinking, well, maybe I wouldn't do it this way, but how else could this be done? And I think the capacity for solarpunk stories to just generate that thought and generate one's imagination is very useful in a world where we don't really get to use our imaginations much. Not really since childhood, you know.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think it's often understated the degree to which using your imagination is a vitally necessary part of actual radical politics.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of people who consider themselves radicals. You know, some of these, not to slam every Marxist-Leninist on the planet, but certainly some of the ones who are coming up with these bad faith criticisms of land back. It's like, you're not a radical, you're a conservative who wants to go back to a different kind of problematic thing. Ignore the fact that the Soviet Union poisoned like the largest body of water in Europe, and all the different things that the Soviet Union did that were horrible for the environment and extractive and colonialist.
I find it interesting that there are these people who call themselves radicals, but at the very first encounter with a radical idea, their first instinct is to shut down. Mm-hmm. Their first instinct is to just push back against it. Whereas, not to toot my own horn or anything, but when I see an idea that I haven't encountered before, that may seem strange to me, that challenges some of my preconceived notions, my first reaction is not to shout about how this goes against everything Lenin said. My first reaction is to investigate it and to open space for it in my mind to really, turn it around and imagine what it might look like and how it might fit with what I have learned about before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's great advice for radical politics. It's also just good life advice.
Yeah. Especially for engaging with ideas that you are less keen on at the moment or just unaware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, my whole thing is if I have like a strong gut reaction to something, it might be because it may be hitting a part of me that might be benefiting from that system. I mean, I don't benefit from the system in a lot of respects, as a black guy from the Caribbean, but as a man, as a cis het man, I do have privileges that I must be aware of, and I can't just be so quick to shut down, something that might make me a bit uncomfortable,
Yeah, I think that's such a valuable thing to keep in mind, especially as a more or less cis white guy, like a significant number of people listening are. If you're uncomfortable by a new idea, is it because the idea is bad, or is it because it strikes at an area in which you may not even have thought about being privileged? Like, I'm uncomfortable. Even though I have no intellectual argument against it with the idea of ending our use of cars as they exist, because I love to drive, but that's also heavily rooted in tremendous privilege on my behalf.
American car culture and stuff.
Yeah. And, we did talk about that a bit in the opening episodes of season 2, the idea that a more, when we kind of had our little utopian ending, the idea that maybe you'd have a car that's communally owned and used for certain tasks, but, the idea of car culture as the center of a city is death. It's just death. When we talk about getting past cars, it's not to say that like people will never use vehicles that move again. Like obviously we will. They're necessary for some.
We're not all going back to horse-drawn buggies.
Yeah.
I think one of the last things on like solar punk and kind of tying into the whole kind of nature of the show is I really liked, Andrew, your point on like how solar punk is like an energizing force. And I feel like we have very few of those on the left, and especially on the anarchist left. Like I've had my decent stint of like anarcho-nihilism, and the problem,
you sure have, haven't we all?
the problem with that is like it's very easy. Like anarcho-nihilism is one of like the easiest ideologies to grasp onto because it validifies all of your bad feelings.
Yeah.
But it also most of the people who I know who are like real into anarcho-nihilism, they're generally not very happy people. Because it's kind of miserable all the time. And sure, they'll like scoff at like solar punk as like some like greenwashed yogurt commercial, like like a utopian thing. But also like it's actually lots of solar punk that we've talked about is like actually about doing specific things. Like it's actually going to do something rather than just being an insurrecto kid, or just talking about nihilist zines and books on Twitter for all day. And I think one of my favorite videos of yours is your video on the psychology of collapse. Because
I think that's one of my favorites as well.
It's really just like a masterpiece in how deep you get into every different type of collapse thinking, because it's not just on the right, it's not just on the left, it's not just whether you're more anarchist, more authoritarian. It's like you get into every specific type of thinking that plays into this idea around collapse. And I think if I recommend everyone check out your channel, and especially watch your solarpunk videos, but specifically on the topic of collapse. Like part of our show we were trying to kind of be a little bit like anti-collapse, and I think your video really shows the depth of that topic, and how to approach this, because collapse is a feeling. Like it's a feeling we all have, and it needs to be interrogated. And I think your video does just a magnificent job interrogating that feeling.
Great, thank you.
I can't overemphasize how important that is, because I one of the major failings, there were a number of victories for kind of anarchist thought, particularly within the United States during the insurrection last year. One of its tremendous defeats is that it has become characterized in a huge number of people's eyes as breaking windows and starting fires. And that's a lot of that is because the media is trash, and is trash at reporting on all of this stuff. But some of it is because a lot of people have let that be their primary praxis. And that, again, I don't care about people breaking windows. I don't care about people lighting dumpster fires. But if that's what you're presenting to the world as your praxis, that doesn't appeal to people, and you have to. Because
you have to remember that anarchism is not just destructive, it is also constructive.
Yeah.
It's the constructive part we need to be boosting more than ever.
And there were some, from the context of Portland, some really strong examples of that last year. The incredible amount of mutual aid that was put together in a very short period of time. Yeah, during the fire relief was incredible. And the Red House, the eviction defense occupation, was a really good riposte to, the disaster that was the Chaz in Seattle. That this was an area that was temporarily autonomous from the police, that did not collapse into violence, that succeeded in its goal, and that cleaned up after itself and presented an option for people like, this is how it can look when we try to evict people. This is what can happen. So I think I don't want to be too negative, but I think that a lot of folks, because of for a variety of reasons, there's been so much focus on kind of the insurrection, not even that. Because I think that building can be insurrectionist. I think that seed bombing, guerrilla gardening can be profoundly insurrectionist.
It's like destruction has an immediate result of making you feel better, right?
Yeah.
It has an immediate rush of endorphins and hormones. It makes you happy when you do it. It is an exhilarating act, and you feel like you're accomplishing something.
Allegedly.
What's harder is to have that same feeling by doing seed bombing, right? By actually improving your community slowly through these types of solar punk ideas. they don't have the same immediate emotional reaction.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, like, when they, think about what insurrection is, they can default to this destructive tendency, which destruction has its time and place. But if that's your only praxis, we're not going to improve the world at all. Like, right? That's not going to do anything.
There's
helping through, giving out food, helping through giving out socks and clothes, helping through all of these solar punk ways. These are things that actually, like, are going to improve things on a tangible level.
Yeah.
And they're going to make more people be like, oh, hey, what are these anarchists doing? That's actually interesting, versus, oh, what are these anarchists doing? This is stupid. Ignore everything they say.
Yeah. People have to remember as well that, there's seeds of solar punk in Kropotkin's writings, from the conquest of bread to mutual aid. And those are sort of things that should be just as emphasized as the destructive, exhilarating aspects of anarchism.
Yeah. There's a line in a Frank Turner song, a couple of lines actually, in a song called 1933 that I go back to a lot. But one of them is, you can't fix the world if all you have is a hammer. And that's, I guess, what I see as like the primary practical benefit of solar punk, just as an aesthetic, as a piece of fiction, is getting people to expand their toolbox.
Yeah, get yourself a trowel, some screwdrivers,
Yeah, keep the hammer. You need that sometimes too, but let's grab some other tools.
Expand the toolbox, I think, is a really great metaphor for all of this type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's most of what we're going to get into today. There's a couple of pieces of things I would want to read. One of them this isn't directly, I think it predates the solar punk, but it I think feeds into some of what, I think it emotionally feeds into a lot of what we're talking about here. It's an essay from David Graeber called The Shock of Victory, which I think is really useful to read.
That's a good one.
Yeah. And I would also recommend Cory Doctorow's new fiction novel, Walk Away, which I think is a really wonderful piece.
That was a wonderful, wonderful book. I should have included it in my recommendations, but it was really great.
I read it recently, and it made me feel the way, like, as a fiction writer, that a good piece of fiction should, which is like I felt bad. I felt bad about some of the things that I had written, because there's so much more courage. Because I wrote a piece of fiction that has some solar punk elements, has some quasi-utopian elements in the dystopia, but I didn't have the courage to kind of go as far as Cory did, and to imagine a kind of pacifism that he has the courage to kind of put into the hands of his protagonists. Like I really respect that about the book.
I mean, the book goes in some very interesting AI directions as well.
Yeah,
but
yeah, it's got some great shit. And I always enjoy Cory's love of Burning Man, of what it could be, as opposed to kind of what some of it's turned into. But yeah, Andrew, is there anything else you wanted to get into before we close this out?
I just want to remind people to check on your friends.
Mm-hmm.
We are all going through various stages of collapse, as I outlined in my video. And, we shift between them from time to time. So try not to go through it alone, There's no I in solar punk.
Yeah. Yeah. Check out St. Andrew on YouTube at St. Andrewism. Andrew, is there anything else you wanted to kind of plug from your own personal work?
Yeah. So other than the solar punk videos and the collapse videos, I want to shout out my video on Black anarchism. I think that is a pretty essential look into the history of Black anarchism in the United States and in the world. I also want to recommend my video on the psychology of authoritarianism. I know a lot of people have family members who are conservative or on the right, or maybe leaning fascist, and I think that might be helpful for helping them to, or rather helping you to understand where their mindset's at.
Mm-hmm.
And also, check out my video on perma blitzing. I think that was a pretty fun one as well. it breaks down a lot of it breaks down how you can go about implementing food forests or permaculture gardens wherever you find yourself.
Awesome. Thank you very much for being on the show, Andrew. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back tomorrow, or if this comes out Friday, we'll be back, another day. We'll be back at some point. You know how this works. You understand podcasts.
Hi, this is Jo Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom-loving and different perspectives, and I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
In 2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Echard, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Police search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
1969. Malcolm and Martin are gone. America is in crisis. And at Morehouse College, the students make their move.
These students, including a young Samuel L. Jackson, locked up the members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr. It's the true story of protest and rebellion in Black American history that you'll never forget. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Podcast. All right, Chris, you go.
So welcome to It Could Happen Here, a podcast that I think for the first time is just me and Robert.
This is the very first time that this is happening. You're all here at a moment of legendary significance and historic importance. So try to face it with the requisite awe. That's all I ask.
Yes, and another thing that, man, this is a terrible transition. Something else we're facing with requisite awe is weird shortages of goods and price increases. So
it's fucking rad. I was just at the Asian market today, and they did not have the snack chips that I most prefer.
Oh,
so
no.
This is now officially a calamity.
We've entered crisis, Phil.
Of historic proportion. Yeah, I don't think we're going to live through this one.
Nope, we're doomed. We can't look without the Asian snack chips. Like, we're done.
It's the ones that are like they're like pieces of seaweed, but that have been fried in tempura batter.
Ooh, oh, that sounds
completely
really good.
out. Tragic, absolutely tragic.
Horrifying.
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, you've got a script, so I'll probably just let you do that in the not too distant future. But one of the things that's frustrating to me, although maybe it shouldn't be, because I'm probably partly responsible for this, is that this is being, this is often kind of being talked about by people online as like, oh, it's a sign that like society is crumbling, and what they mean by that is that like, oh, we just don't have stuff, like we're not able to like keep up with demand, and like the ability to produce these things is crumbling. And it's actually much more complex than that, and a lot less rooted in a lack of specific resources and more decisions made under capitalism about how the supply chain would work. And it's, I don't know, I think it's important because it is, you can say it still is like a situation where this is an example of the system falling apart, but it's not falling apart because we don't have the paper to make toilet paper with. It's falling apart because decisions were made in order to increase the stock prices of companies by reducing the amount of products that they kept on hand. And that's led to an incredibly fragile system that did nothing well but maximize profits.
And I think, well, okay, I think there's a couple of things with that we should talk about.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of different explanations that are floating around for why it's happening. And I think some of them are good, but I think a lot of them are missing part of the story.
Yeah.
And I think it's important because, okay, so like my grandma like called me yesterday, like called our family to like talk about the supply chain problem because someone had like, she'd been like fed a conspiracy theory that like the shortages were because American dock workers like didn't want to open containers from China. Yeah, it's like, yeah, like this is not what's
that's
happening,
not right, but it's not like if that had happened, it would be like, well, okay, that does scan, like,
and I think,
and
like I think this is a moment where, okay, think things are not working how they're supposed to, and there's a lot of sort of competing stories about it, some of which are good, some of which are bad, and I think most of the conventional accounts, and Robert was talking about this, even the really good ones, they start with sort of the 80s Wall Street takeover of corporate America and the transformation of sort of all corporate management into an attempt to like raise short-term stock prices.
Yeah.
And, part of this is lean in production. And this is true. And this is sort of true, but this misses about half of the story. And the part of the story that it misses that's really important, and I think is the sort of, it's the broader like frame in which all of this is happening in, is essentially the story of how the working class essentially loses the class war in the 60s and 70s. And weirdly, it's also a story about Foucault's boomerang, which,
hell yeah.
This is a long
throw in the music clip that we've all decided is going to be the one we put in whenever someone talks about Foucault's boomerang.
Yeah.
Which is probably just going to be another time machine noise. So real quick.
Foucault's boomerang noise.
Credit to Cody. Okay, continue.
Brief refresher on what that is. So basically, Foucault's boomerang is that, okay, if a government does something like repressive, like repressive technique or repressive technology, like in a colony, like in a war somewhere, eventually it'll come back and be used against like the citizens of that country. And
a great example would be fingerprinting was invented for the British, like policing insurgents in Malaysia, and has come back to every colonizing nation now uses fingerprinting, which is also deeply flawed as a technology. But anyway,
and and I think most people tend to think about this as armored personnel carriers, but we'll eventually get to this. The boomerang technology here is actually shipping containers.
Hell yeah,
which have done like irreparable damage to mankind.
All right, I'm ready for this. I don't know much about this. Hit me.
All right, bear with me with this because we're going to talk about two threads. They're going to seem like they have nothing to do with supply chains, and then they're all going to tie together, and it turns out it's literally all supply chains. So, in the 60s and 70s, you have in very, very broad general strokes, you have two kinds of class war. The first kind is what I'm sort of very broadly calling the war in the factories. And this is an enormous series of sort of strikes and outright uprisings that stretch from sort of Detroit to Turin to Tokyo. And the most famous of these is the student sort of worker uprising in May 68 in France. And they're close enough to taking the country that like French President Charles de Gaulle like flees in a helicopter to in secret flees to Germany in secret. And that's like a big event, but it sort of fades. What doesn't fade is May 68 in Italy. And it doesn't fade there because Italy has been in the middle of a strike wave since 1962, 64. It's the whole 60s have basically just been strike waves there. And, they have their own 1968. And unlike in France where it peters out, in Italy you get the just incredibly named hot autumn of 69, which is my favorite name ever for a historical event. Yeah, it rules.
Yeah, I'll bet it was a hot autumn.
Yeah, it's great. And so basically what happens is you get hundreds of thousands of workers go on strike. They start seizing control of their factories. And most of this is playing out in the Fiat factories. These giant car factories in Italy's industrial triangle. And they're there for a long time. They're there into like 1970, and eventually they lose. But Italy is just sort of rocked by conflict and sort of class war stuff. And all of this sort of culminates in yet another enormous uprising in 1977. This one driven like in large part by people who are basically just like, fuck this, I'm not working in the factory anymore. It's awful, which I think is something that like, if you're looking at the modern political landscape, you have a bunch of people who are going like, fuck this, I'm not going to go like die in these factories anymore. And
and those people all have, in a lot of cases, safer employing situations than many people today.
Yeah.
It's starting to get worse then, which is why people are frustrated. But like, there were pensions.
Yeah. And this it's sort of interesting because there's a kind of like Vicky Osterwald we've had on here calls it like the monkey's paw thing, where it's like people in the 70s in Italy wanted like autonomy and like freedom from work. And so what capitalism gave them was like, oh, we'll give you autonomy. We'll just make you all contract workers. And now, like, yeah, you don't have to like wake up every morning and like go to a job in the factory and leave at 5 or whatever. But now you just, you're a contract worker, so you just have no stability whatsoever, and that's your autonomy. But this is really bad for the Italian ruling class. Like, they almost lose control of Italy 3 times in 10 years. And after 1977, they're just like, fuck this. And they start doing mass arrests. They imprison like tens of thousands of people. They torture a bunch of people. And, but it becomes clear that like pure political repression is like not going to be enough to like just destroy the section of the working class movements that, God help you, thinks that you should like run production for themselves. And so they start looking elsewhere for answers. And the place they find these answers, weirdly enough, is in the second set of wars that are going on in this period, which are the sort of national liberation wars. And, these are the national liberation wars. These are full scale. Like, these aren't sort of class war metaphors. These are, this is Guinea-Bissau, this is Algeria. And, importantly for our purposes, the U.S. fights 2 of them, which is Korea and Vietnam. Now, Korea and Vietnam are strategically really bad places for the U.S. to fight wars. Like, they're on the other side of the world, which, it makes it more difficult to do war crimes because, if you're firebombing a village, right, you have to be able to move firebombs, jet fighters, and like oil and rations to the other side of the world. And this is hard, as it turns out.
It's going to be a lot easier when they can commit war crimes in, like, I don't know, Duluth.
Yeah. Well, like even like you got to commit a war crime in Mexico. It's like, okay, you just send a bunch of people over the border.
Oh, it'd be so easy to commit war crimes in Mexico.
Yeah,
and really, really up our war crime quotient.
Well, I would say this, we do a lot of war crimes in Mexico. It's just that like they're done basically by proxies. That's true. But I mean, we've killed like 1 million people there in the last like 20 years in the war on drugs, but. Yeah, so the U.S., okay, so it has this logistics problem, and the logistics problem is that it can't do war crimes enough. And so it comes up with a couple of solutions to them. One of them is essentially they rebuild the whole Japanese economy in order to just use Japan's industrial base to fight the war in Korea. And then after the war in Korea ends, they rebuild the South Korean economy in order to, fight the war in Vietnam. And this works, but it doesn't solve the problem that, okay, even if you have an industrial base in Japan, right? You still need to be able to efficiently move things by sea to Korea. And, there's still supplies you need to move from the US. And so the solution for this is containerized shipping. And containerized shipping, this is the pivot point upon which the entire history of the 20th century and everything that's happened in the 21st century hinges on. Like this is the pivot. And this isn't even really an exaggeration, because it turns out that the ability to have uniform boxes that you can stack on top of each other like Legos and put on a ship is comparable to the nuclear bomb in terms of how important it is. Which is a really weird thing to say.
The only way to get things from A to B was a big wooden ship filled with doubloons, like bags and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. How did we global commerce work before shipping containers? What did we?
You literally you just sometimes you would just physically people would just pick up the items and put them on the ship, or they would sometimes they put them in boxes, or you would strap them to the top of the ship. And so with trains a lot, they would just strap machinery onto a train car. And this was this is really inefficient. It's really slow. Yeah. And so the US, in order to do war crimes in Korea, and then it just oh, hey, what if we just make metal boxes? And then they progressively get better and better at it because, they have to go do more war crimes in Vietnam. But by the time you're getting to the end, look, lots of war crimes to do. You need good logistics networks to do all of these war crimes.
I mean, it makes sense that that's where we got shipping containers, but I didn't realize, I had just assumed it would have come out of the shipping industry as opposed to we got to get more missiles over to these places.
Yeah, well, this is the interesting thing. We'll get to this in a bit, but basically, a lot of the logistics revolution stuff either comes out of the military or is developed by ex-fascists. And a lot of the reason for this is, okay, I mean, this is, the 60s and 70s, there's still R&D happening. There's still actual research and development, but the military is doing just an enormous amount of the research and development for just all of global capitalism. And, the other thing that's what's happening here, and this is the sort of Foucault's boomerang thing, is that, so the containerized shipping logistics stuff that had been used to just obliterate the global South suddenly starts spreading into capital, just into broader shipping, because people look at this and are like, oh, this is efficient. And then the contracting companies the US is using, this turns into the solution to both sort of the war in the factories I was talking about in Europe and the US and in Japan itself. And then also to the solution of the national liberation movements and sort of communism in East Asia. Because, okay, so you have this question, right? The US, we kind of fight to a draw in Korea. We kill an enormous number of people, but...
Yeah, about 20% of the North Korean population.
Yeah, and but we don't really win, right? We can't actually defeat the Chinese army. And we lose Vietnam. And so the question is, okay, so how are we going to stop communism? And the answer, it turns out, is to just integrate the communist countries into the capitalist supply chain. And I mean, there's a lot of examples of this. Margaret Thatcher, for example, is very good buddies with Nicolae Ceausescu.
Aw, that's nice. It's nice that they could be friends despite the fact that they, I guess they weren't really that different as people.
No, not really. Basically the difference is that Ceausescu lost and thus got murdered on state television, and Margaret Thatcher won and
murdered out
got a state funeral.
Yeah, she should have gotten the Ceausescu treatment. That's my official stance. They should have Ceausescu'd her.
Yes. For stuff we will talk about in a bit. But the archetypal example of this is actually China. And, there's a lot of very sort of skilled diplomatic work by Kissinger And also the US, like throughout the 70s, just like they're just like sending entire factories to China. They'll take an entire factory, break it down, put it in boxes, and then just like ship it to China.
Great.
At the time. And they're just like sending technology to China. And the end result of this is that, you know, China goes from like fighting American troops with like doing bayonet charges like through their own artillery.
Mass human wave shit. Like
against the
nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, just like to you know, being an American ally in like invading Vietnam as a way to like stick it to the Soviets, basically. And so, you know, so the U.S. essentially just integrates China into the global supply chain, and they eventually do the same thing to Vietnam, which again is another country that they couldn't defeat militarily, but what they actually defeat them with is the shipping container. Yep. And before the shipping container, this would have been impossible, right? Like basically, it was too inefficient and too expensive. Like the cost of shipping was too high to have all of this production. You know, like half your parts made in China, some of them made in India, some of them made in like Japan, some of them made in Korea, and then shipped them all around the world, which is how the modern system works. But with containerized shipping, suddenly shipping is really cheap. And it becomes much cheaper to pay shipping costs than it is to pay labor costs. And this is the solution to the sort of war in the factories. You know, if workers start making too much noise about pay, or like, again, God forbid, start talking about like taking control of factories and running them democratically like some kind of anarchist monsters, corporations can just move the factories overseas. And this becomes an incredibly effective way to just destroy the labor movement, because anytime, you know, organized labor starts making demands, you can be like, well, okay, sorry, we're just going to pack up and we're going to go to China, we're going to go to somewhere else. And this coincides with, you know, the thing that gets talked about a lot in the conventional accounts, which is the Wall Street sort of corporate takeover. Well, the Wall Street takeover of corporate America, which is something I think that sounds really weird to us now, but you know, the whole story here is really interesting and extremely long. And if you want to like have a very detailed account of how this all played out, the book Liquidated by Karen Ho is just incredible. Like ethnography and history of Wall Street. She she's Karen Ho's an anthropologist, and she like went and worked on Wall Street and like did ethnography there for a bit, and it's just very interesting stuff. But it's kind of outside of our scope. So the very, very, very short version is that the Wall Street bankers basically figure out a way to just like buy out corporations, to like raise a bunch of money and just entirely buy out corporations. And then once they have the corporation, right, what you know, this is corporate raiding. So they loot all the assets, they sell it off, and they try to sell off their stock at a higher price. The process of this is sort of complicated, but the net result of this is that Wall Street completely takes over the corporate world in a way they hadn't before. Like the Wall Street like finance people are now, you know, they're the people making all the decisions, and you know, and their only goal is to raise the stock price. Like that's the only thing they care about. They don't even care about making money, right? If you lose money and your stock price still rises, like you don't care. And those guys start looking at a lot of the things that had existed in corporations before that, things like pensions, particularly things like research and development. And they look at it and go, okay, why are we spending money on R&D? Like this doesn't raise our stock price. This doesn't have any immediate short-term value. So they cut it, right? They start cutting pensions. They start essentially just destroying the unions. And, you know, because this is happening at the same time as corporations really like get the ability to outsource for the first time, you know, they lean into it and they start essentially just slashing the amount of people who work for the company. Right. And so, you know, and instead of having direct employees, they start working with contractors, and they start moving the contractors overseas. And, you know, and this is where we get to sort of this whole outsourcing wave, because, you know, something I don't think is talked about enough with outsourcing is why actually are the labor costs lower in the countries that these people are moving their factories to? Mm-hmm. And part of it is, you know, people talk about development, like they're moving to undeveloped countries. And, you know, part of development is just, you know, how much technological capacity their manufacturing system has, right? And that, you know, but the other part of it is that if you move your production to, say, Colombia, right? Or like, you know, you're investing in sort of like cocoa bean farming in Colombia. and people try to do union organizing, you can hire death squads to murder them.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like you can basically just sort of like you can outsource the violence, and you can the corporate term for it is reducing labor costs, but really what you're doing is just like murdering people with death squads and terrorizing them.
Mm-hmm.
And that does lower labor costs, right? But and I think there's another example of this. Like, this is a lot of what like the killing at Tiananmen was really about. It was not so much in Tiananmen Square itself. No, I've talked about this elsewhere, but like the workers that they kill outside of the square. Like a lot of the reason they're doing this.
I know very little about Tiananmen Square other than like protesters, China government bad. The guy stands up to tank and then disappears.
I've talked about this elsewhere more. Like the very short version is, so there's a bunch of students in the square, right? And the students in the square itself, like basically they kind of want democracy. Mostly they want like market reforms to go faster. But then outside of the square, like Beijing's like whole working class shows up, and there's these enormous demonstrations. They basically start like barricading like blocks and blocks and blocks in like this radius outside of the street. And you get this sort of like mini commune thing, and those guys are like, like they're advocating for democracy in the factory. Like they're talking about things like they're like they have their like marks out, and they're talking about how like they're calculating the rate of surplus value that's being extracted from them by the capitalists. And those are the people, like almost everyone who dies at Tiananmen is from those guys. Like those are the people that they just get massacred.
Mm-hmm.
And and the reason that happens is that the CCP is looking at this and is like, okay, this is the return of organized labor, and we need to destroy it before it like gets anywhere. And so they do, and organized labor in China just implode. I mean, it was already pretty weak because you have a lot of state-controlled unions, but I mean, now it's just nothing. And there have been attempts to do labor organizing in China sort of recently, and like, yeah, the CCP just arrests everyone, right? And so this is the price of cheap labor, right? It's just incredible state repression. But this is also, and this is a sort of like macro scale thing of why the supply chains suck, because everyone talks about like the efficiency of the supply chains, but the supply chains aren't efficient. They make no sense, right? If what you're trying to do is move something quickly from point A to point B, they make no sense, because these supply chains are spread all over the world. Like individual parts are being made in 6 countries, right? You have like people will, like for tax dodge purposes, like they'll have one part of a component built in one country, and then they'll move it to another country to have another part of it, and then they'll ship all of it to Mexico, and then they'll ship it across the border, and they'll have the whole thing be assembled in the US so they can say it was made in the US. Like there's all of these things that are just nonsense, right? They're not efficient at all. It's completely ridiculous. It's this just it's just completely absurd web, and the reason why it's designed like this is as a giant sort of counterinsurgency thing. Like the reason supply chains are just bad is because they're they're not designed to move things. They're designed as an instrument to just like solve the problem of class power, right? They're designed to destroy unions. They're designed to make sure that nobody ever sort of like gets any ideas about wages, to make sure nobody gets any ideas about like taking anything. And so, but this can work for a while. The problem is, again, like they're not efficient. Like it is not efficient to like have everything made in like 6 countries, and then you have to assemble them somewhere else. Yeah, and so
it's efficient in the sense that it efficiently maximizes the value of stock prices for like stock buybacks and stuff, and that's generally what is meant by like efficiency. That sense is like what makes the 70 people who actually own this company the most money. That's the efficient thing, but it's horribly inefficient in every practical sense of the word.
Yep. And this is kind of an interesting change because, I mean, this isn't to say that like the supply chains that worked before this were like better, because they also sucked in a lot of their own ways. But all of the like efficiency stuff that we're about to talk about, like just in time production, et cetera, like,
what isn't produced just in time? Sorry, but it is an ad break time.
Yeah, they're not produced just in time anymore because the supply chain's falling apart. It's our sponsors.
Yeah, that is our promise about our sponsors, is that they're not at all in time. Who knows when they'll get your products to you? There's no way to tell. It's impossible to know. We're back.
Yeah, we're back to talk about how, having developed an entire network of extremely inefficient supply chains that just absolutely suck and don't make any sense, people tried to make them efficient. And this is where we go back to Japan, because Japan, I guess this is the other Foucault's boomerang, which is that, okay, so we industrialized Japan in order to like fight our colonial wars, right? But then, this turns into this huge like Pikachu face moment when Japan suddenly starts like industrializing more efficiently than the US does.
Yeah, it's very funny. And then Michael Crichton writes a bunch of books that are, the premise of all of them is Japan's scary.
Yeah, it's
very
really funny. Yeah, and, it's just interesting. It's an interesting thing here, which is that like all of the panic around China, there was exactly the same panic like around Japan in the 70s and 80s. It's exactly the same, like right down to like a bunch of socialists going like, "Hey, look, this is a model for anti-capitalism." Like people said that about the Japanese model, and it's like it's all the same thing. It's just happening again. But what Japan did, and specifically what Toyota does, is create this thing called the Toyota Production System, which eventually becomes known as just-in-time production. And this, if you've read anything about sort of the modern supply chain problems, you've almost certainly heard of just-in-time production or lean production. And just-in-time and lean production are technically different, but the differences don't matter for us. So, yeah, and this stuff is derived from what Toyota was sort of doing in the post-war era. And basically, the goal of it is you're never supposed to have any inventory that's just sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole system's supposed to be constantly in motion. So you have parts come in, they immediately get put into the production line, and the finished product's immediately shipped out to the stores. And, the theory is that the stores are only going to carry exactly enough product to meet demand. And it's supposed to be quote unquote flexible, which means that it can like react to shifts in consumer taste and demand by like increasing or decreasing production. And it can't do this. This is what we've been seeing for the entirety of COVID, which is that, this is why every time there's a run on toilet paper, everyone runs out of toilet paper, because it turns out that these systems can't, even a 10% increase just completely obliterates this entire system, and it just collapses and can't produce enough toilet paper.
Yeah, and again, just because it's expensive to store things, it's pricey. This is a big part of like why actually the John Deere strike, which has the potential to disrupt the status quo more than any strike in recent history, is so potent, because John Deere tractors are kind of a necessary part of the agricultural industry, not just their ability to sell new tractors, but their ability to repair the extant tractors. Like if harvest season comes around and there's not spare parts to repair tractors that break, like food doesn't get harvested. It's a significant issue. John Deere, we'll talk more about this at another date, but like not only did the most that they could do to squeeze their employees, to suck out pensions, to cut expenditures on wages, but they set up their factories in such a way that there was no extra space, so they could not scale up any of these factories to increase demand when they needed to, so that now that John Deere's going on strike, if they lose a month of productivity, they can't ever catch up. It's impossible, because they can't actually expand the productive capacity of their factories. And because the strike is hitting, they didn't have any extra spare parts lying around. So if shit gets broken, they can't manufacture the parts necessary to keep tractors functioning in a lot of American farms, because they didn't store anything, because that was not the most efficient thing for the economic bottom line of the CEO who gets $160 million a year.
Yeah, and this is the funny part about this whole thing, which is that, so this whole supply chain system was based around just like destroying the organized working class, right? But it's like they were so successful at it that they've like turned around and fucked themselves with it. Because like, this is the thing about the John Deere strike, right? It used to be, back if you look at like how the unions were broken in the 80s, or like if you look at like the giant like auto strikes you'd have in the 70s, right? And companies still do this to this day, but like they're worse at it. The thing they would do is so you know, if you're a company, you know roughly when a strike is going to happen, right? And the reason you know when a strike is going to happen is because in the US, like the way labor law works is that like you can basically only strike like when a contract is up. I mean, you can do wildcats, but it's illegal. But so they knew that the auto unions, for example, were going to go on strike when the contract like was coming up, and they'd have spies, and you can get a sense of like, so are how likely are they to do this strike? And so that lets you do things like build up an enormous sort of inventory of spare parts. It lets you build up an inventory of supplies, and it lets you build up, it lets you build up the capacity you need to outlast the strike. But the problem with just in time is they can't do that anymore because they've completely fucked themselves
and in the John Deere situation, because the workers hadn't gone on strike since '86.
Yeah,
they'd been putting funds into their strike survival fund for years, but the company had nothing. Like has nothing. It's rad.
Yeah. And this is this is the other part of why everything like good that's happening right now is happening, is that everything has circled back around, and suddenly all of these companies are are incredibly vulnerable to strikes again, because as you're talking about the just in time production thing, it only works if everything actually comes in on time. Right, like if any individual part is late, the whole system starts to fall apart, and then you can't repair it. And and there's a lot of ways that this can be very bad. We've talked about the John Deere, we've talked about the labor stuff. The other big thing that's happening is COVID, which has happened and continues to happen, and has killed off just enormous parts of the working class. I mean, it's like 4 million dead worldwide or something, and again that's also probably an undercount, because that's just direct deaths. That's not like it's probably like twice that. I mean,
we're looking at a minimum of 725,000 in the US, and again that's probably a million undercounted at least.
It's a horror show, right? And the people they killed with that, like especially in the initial phases, like it was just they took a chainsaw to the working class. And those are a bunch of people who, they're not replaceable. They're very highly skilled, and they do a bunch of jobs that absolutely suck. And now, and one of the places that this has caused a bunch of problems is in the ports, because the other thing that this entire supply chain relies on is being able to very quickly and cheaply move parts from China to the US, from China to Mexico, from like Bangladesh to like Somalia. You have to be able to continuously like keep moving stuff around in you have to continuously keep moving ships around, and you also have to be able to load and unload them. And we saw like there was that when that ship got stuck in the Suez, there was that whole that was
sex asses were people couldn't get sex asses because the world's supply of sex asses for months was on that one ship. It was a real crisis for the sex ass community. Those are plastic asses that you have sex with, if you're curious.
Yeah, it is. The world appears as an immense collection of commodities, some of which are sex asses.
Yeah, most of which, in terms of the ones that matter, are sex asses.
Yes.
The sex ass industrial complex is really the linchpin of global capital, but please continue.
Yeah, well, the sex ass industrial complex falls apart. And, and it's not just the ship being stuck in the Suez, like made everything way worse, right? But
and was very funny.
Yeah, it was extremely funny.
It was extremely funny.
The thing that's like not very funny is that like, okay, so in order to get any of this to work, right, you have to have a bunch of longshoremen who have to unload all of this shit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the problems that is happening in the sort of global supply chain right now is that the ships can't be unloaded fast enough. And part of this is like this job sucks, and a lot of people don't want to do it. A lot of people died.
Yeah,
and it's causing this huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another, if you want to take like the macro perspective about this, it's that this whole system is reliant on logistics workers. And so it also needs, you need truck drivers, And we're coming back, and in the U.S. is like there's a shortage of truck drivers now because again their job sucks, and they've been like just absolutely screwing these people over for decades and decades and decades now, and turning them into subcontractors, just not paying them, and when the port shut down, like not even shut down, but like when the ports are behind unloading stuff, and when the trucks like that are supposed to be moving this stuff, there aren't enough of them, and like the cost of that increases, it throws off the whole system. And that's another big part of like why this whole thing is sort of imploding. And it's interesting because I remember there was like a decade where like every other article would be talking about how they were going to like automate like truck driving. And it was like, the truck drivers are all going to go out of business because they're going to automate. It just never happened at all. And the same thing with there, there's been some port automation, but like not on the scale that, actually does anything. And part of the reason for that is, I was talking about people not investing in research and developments. Yeah. So the biggest people who aren't doing that are the shipping companies. And that's a good time because the shipping basically like container shipping has been taken over by what's essentially just like a monopoly of two companies. And those two companies make just an indescribable amount of money. They have like 1,000% profits, and they just pay it all out as dividends. And so they're not investing in any port infrastructure. They're not investing in automation. They're just pocketing the money. And that means that, we have all this.
And they're spending in the case of John Deere, which I keep going back to, a bunch of money lobbying to make it illegal for farmers to repair their tractors.
Yeah. They figured out that like the easiest way to make money is to just get the state to shake people down for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, fuck like investing in making anything that we have better. Let's just, let's just turn the state into a debt collector. And it's interesting because this is the part of the supply chain crisis that like Biden's been focusing on. But Biden's plan's great. Biden's plan is literally make the longshoremen work harder. So his plan is,
there we go. Building back better, baby.
Yeah, we're gonna keep the ports open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and like make people work weekends now. And then he also got FedEx, Walmart, and UPS to do 24-hour, 7-day-a-week shipping. So yeah, the solution is literally just like feed more workers into a grinder and make them work longer. Which is great, and
mm-hmm.
Will not in any way backfire.
No, it's fine. I don't even think we should be talking about it.
No, it's great. But again, like this is the thing. Like this won't work, and like it can't. And the reason it won't work is that like part of the reason there's a shortage is that it's not just about the fact that people aren't paying enough. It's about the fact that these jobs are just awful. Like. You have people working like 12-hour shifts that start at like 6 a.m. and then
mm-hmm.
they have to work another 12-hour shift 8 hours later, and they just keep having to do this over and over and over again. And it's
and they don't like the way that these shifts are usually put on them is that like you'll find out when you come in that instead of working 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. or whatever, they're actually going to need you to stay until 8, and then they're going to need you to come in. By the way, you're going to need to come in like 2 hours early tomorrow, so you realize that like. In between your two shifts, you have a total of 8 hours to get home and sleep. And if you say no, the idea is that if you say no, like you won't have the job. It's required. Now, the reality is that most of these companies are also pretty desperate to have these workers, and a lot of these manufacturing and packing firms, it takes time to train people up, and then they quit a couple of weeks in because the work is miserable and the schedule is fucking miserable.
Yep.
And it's simultaneously like deeply inhuman, but also is leading to a situation. There's a reason why there's so many strikes on right now is that there is opportunity because in sort of the chasing of short-term profits, a lot of these fucking oligarchs have exposed themselves in a pretty vulnerable position.
Yeah, and I think this is coming back to a sort of. The other way that when there was a crisis in the 60s, 70s, the other way they solved this was just authoritarianism, right? It was, this is the Pinochet solution, right? Like, workers are seizing control, copper mines. Okay, we'll just shoot them,
mm-hmm.
right?
And we're out of workers.
and this is, they're finally running into a point where, this is the solution they've been trying to do now with this crisis is, they're relying on the fact that just the workplace is just indescribably authoritarian. I mean, it's a dictatorship on a scale that is like even to like the most despotic absolute monarch is just like unimaginable. Like your boss gets to control like when you shit, like they get to control when you eat, they get to control exactly what you're doing, like at all times. They get to control when you do it. They get to control like when the next time you're going to do it is. They don't even have to tell you when it's going to be until like you show up. And for this has been the gamble for capitalism's entire existence, which is that like you just have to take this and eat shit, or they get to take away your ability to eat, get medical care, and have a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not true anymore. Like you can just say no. You can tell them to fuck off. You can organize a union. You can just leave your job. Like just leave it. Fucking walk out.
Yeah, this is why we focus. I mean, this is number one why within the context of unions, strike funds are so important, but also why mutual aid is so important. Is it potentially, when organized well enough, provides people with the option to, like, well, how are you going to feed yourself? Well, there's people in my community who want to make sure that I'm fed because they believe in what I'm striking for. That's the promise of all of that. That's the practical behind the kind of high-minded, anarchist, just whatever theorizing is the ability that like, well, this actually is a weapon too.
Yeah, and I think
what else is a weapon, Chris?
Our product. I hope we're not being sponsored.
Some of them. I hope we are, Chris. Look. I've said before, for weapons, I'll read any ad for a weapons manufacturer as long as they send me some weapons. So come on, guys, get on it. You could be in the middle of this conversation, Raytheon. Send me a couple of missile guidance chips. Lockheed Martin. You want to give me an F-35? We'll plug you. That's the deal. That's how it works, baby. All right, we're back.
Hopefully you have now heard the advertisement for Knife Missile 2, Knife Missile Harder, now with like 5 knives, a thing that I am not making up and actually exists.
Yeah, no, people keep being surprised that the R9X is a real thing. And
but there's another one.
Is.
There's one with more knives. They put more knives.
Well, what you're not going to look again. You can't. It's like with Apple products, right? Planned obsolescence is critical. You can't just rest on your laurels. You're going to run out of money. So you got to make another knife missile with a couple of more knives.
Yeah, just keep adding knives. Nothing can ever go wrong. Mm-hmm. Do not ask any questions about why you're developing knife missiles.
Please
in the first
send
place.
me one. Send me one and like a drone or 3. Swear to God, I'll use it for legal purposes.
Yeah, so I guess the last thing that's really interesting about this moment that doesn't usually happen is that, okay, so if you read your very basic Marx, right? One of the things Marx talks about is that there's this thing called the reserve army of labor, which is it's just like, there's a bunch of people who are just always unemployed, mm-hmm. and they get along by doing sort of like odd jobs, or like, my quintessential person for this is like, if you ever go on a subway, there's it's the guy selling candy bars in the subway.
Yeah,
right.
It's people who quasi-legal, sometimes outright illegal. They're just kind of like doing whatever. Trim immigrants, we call them in the West Coast. You have a lot of those, like people who trim marijuana for a couple of months and then just kind of like crash in, campsites the rest of the year or whatever. Like, there's a bunch of those folks for sure.
Yeah, and like the number of these people who've been just like kicked out of like the formal labor system has been increasing for a long time. But what's interesting about this moment is that, every strike you see has a second strike behind it. And that strike is the informal general strike, which is just, again, people just quitting their jobs and leaving. And you have this weird moment where normally the sort of the reserve army of labor is this thing that like capitalism can always sort of rely on as a way to sort of solve its problems. Because it's like, oh, well, all right, if you're not going to do this job, we can bring in another person. But, this is a weird moment where like the reserve army of labor is like fighting on our side.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that all of these people are just like, you know, they're seeing the just incredible authoritarianism of these workplaces, the just horrific abuse, the fact that, you know, they're being in a lot of cases just asked to show up and die, and they're saying no, is a really incredibly powerful thing. And when you add that to the fact that, you know, all these companies have completely screwed themselves with how they design the supply chains, or it's all come back around, and suddenly all the supply chain stuff that they carefully laid out over decades and decades and decades is a way to just like break the union movement and make sure nobody ever asks for more wages. You know, it's been revealed to be incredibly fragile and, you know, weak to our attack. And that leads us, I think, to this other tension in Biden's plan to sort of like revive the economy, which is that, so the US, technically speaking, has this like very large central planning capability, but it only has it to like build weapons. So, you know, like the army has this incredible ability. Like there's
like
a
lot
number
of bullets, you know, despite the huge stress on the bullet supply chain, it really has scaled. You know, the prices have increased, but we're still getting bullets. America's great at making bullets.
Yeah, it's
less great at keeping tractors working, but that won't ever be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, like even if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like the U.S. just couldn't produce masks. Like we never like did that, right? Like the government never at any point was like, we're just gonna make masks and give them to people. Like they just never did it. And so, you know, our mass supply chain, all the supply chains suck. And the only way that like the states can intervene and get the supply chains to work is by doing one of two things. It's by either doing a thing Biden was doing, which is just go to a bunch of companies and tell them to make all of their workers work harder, which is the thing that, like, you know, totally won't backfire or explode in his face. And then the second thing is for Biden basically to like do all this saber rattling about how we have to have like medical supply chains in the US because national defense or something. And that's the second thing he's trying to do. But, you know, that just makes the problem worse, right? Because once you lose the ability to outsource, you lose the hammer you've been beating the unions with. And so, you know, all of the sort of all of the tendencies that are, you know, making things like bad and scary right now are also weirdly making this, you know, like the fact that prices are rising, right? The fact that there's all these shortages, it's making this like the best moment to, you know, it's making this the best moment that anyone's had in ages to actually try to make something better.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing is we're starting to see it happen. And yeah, and we're going to talk more about Striketober and sort of the strike wave in the coming, you know, weeks and months. But
yeah, we're gonna be hitting this pretty hard even just next week. We have a lot of stuff in the pipeline. Kind of wish we'd gotten to it earlier, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about in the world happening that's within our milieu. It turns out when your specific focus is things falling apart, you're always behind on covering all of the things that are falling apart. But I think it is a good time to drive this to a close, to drag this episode out behind the farm, the barn, and shoot it and bury it in a shallow grave and break its bones with a hammer so that the police can't identify it. Chris, thank you for putting this together. Got anything else to say?
Quit your job or unionize your workplace or take it over and run it yourselves, because Lord knows the people who are telling you what to do just literally do not care if you die. Yeah. And I mean, with that, oh, sorry.
No. I was just gonna, I don't know what I was gonna do, Chris. I don't know what I was gonna do. Go do something. You know, you're listening to things. Go do something.
Yeah. And if you want to listen to us do more things, we are
allegedly,
we are at Cool Zone Media on the Twitter and the Instagram.
You can't prove that in court.
It's true. Good luck to them trying to prove that we did this.
Yeah, that's right, motherfuckers. All right. Bye.
2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, this is Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom-loving and different perspectives, and I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Police search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Excellent work, Chris. That's good. That's good. That's the kind of atonal grunting that people have come to expect from the introductions of my podcasts.
I was hoping it wouldn't be that, but then it was so bad that it was great.
No, Sophie.
I loved
that's
it. I'm thrilled.
That's our brand now. It can't be anything else. We've established it. Look, nobody else is doing that. The Cumtown guys, I assume, aren't atonally grunting to start their podcast. I don't know, actually, but I assume not. What is this podcast, Chris?
I guess this is just how we start. It could happen here. Is a podcast.
Is that true? You don't sound like you believe it. Enthusiastically, Chris, with feeling.
This is a podcast.
Damn
about
right it
things
is.
happening here.
That's
it's about
right,
things falling
motherfuckers.
apart.
Yeah, excellent. That's how we do it. Okay, what are we talking about today?
Well, one of the things that is happening here, as we have discussed briefly in previous episodes, is a bunch of strikes.
Yep.
And
yeah,
with us today to talk about one of these strikes, specifically the Kellogg strike, is Mel Buer, an independent researcher, educator, and freelance journalist based in Omaha, Nebraska, where this particular strike is taking place, who has done a lot of journalism previously on the local sort of protests and uprisings in 2020, and is also researching and writing a book on alternative media.
Hi.
Hello.
What's up?
Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Strikes apparently is what's up. It is
Strikes.
Striketober. We're doing strikes.
Strike wave, baby. Yee.
So this specific strike, can you walk us through a bit about how we got to the point where this Kellogg's factory is on strike?
Well, first off, it's 4 plants. It's all 4 American Kellogg cereal plants have gone on strike. The workers in these plants are represented by the Bakery, Confectionery, Tobacco Workers, and Grain Millers International Union.
I do love that bakeries and tobacco workers are in the same union.
Yeah.
That's rad. Yeah.
Yeah. So their contract was up for renegotiation in 2020, actually. And due to a series of weird things happening, they pushed the negotiations to 2021. They renegotiate their contract every 5 years. And at stake this year was a sort of pushing back against a recently introduced 2-tier employment system that the company sort of strong-armed the union into in 2015, which essentially it's not a good deal for anyone. In 2015, they pushed in this sort of 2-tier system where 1 tier is a lower transitional tier and 1 tier is a legacy or full-time employee tier. And what it is, it amounts to a difference of $12 an hour and less benefits.
Yeah, that's significant.
Yes. Dan Osborne recently did an interview with Max Alvarez at Working People podcast, and he really kind of talked about exactly what was going on there. And, there's 1,400 people who work in 4 plants. There's about 480 employees at the Omaha plant, which has been around for decades. And essentially what this tier system does is it's capped at 30% of their union workforce. And the whole idea is as these full-time employees retire or quit, then these transitional employees will sort of be funneled into the full-time tier, right? Over the last 5 years, it hasn't really happened, really, at all. It was a bad deal from the start, according to many of the workers who sort of felt like they were backed into a wall because Kellogg's was threatening to close the Memphis plant if they didn't ratify this negotiated contract. So rather than experience, 500 layoffs in Memphis, they just agreed to it. So they knew going to the negotiating table in 2021 and 2020 that they were going to try and sort of walk that back because these workers all work in the same plant, same days, first, second, third shift. The transitional workers are working side by side with these full-time employees, working the same hours, which can amount to 7 days a week, 12 to 16 hours a day on mandatory overtime. And they are making $12 an hour less, and they are not getting the benefits that these full-time employees are getting. So really, these full-time employees are kind of going to bat for the transitional employees. Kellogg's wants to remove the cap, which the union negotiated, which is at 30% of their workforce. They want to do away with that so that they can continue hiring more transitional workers. And they want to fuck with the insurance benefits. So the union tried to negotiate this. I think, according to the local union president, Kellogg's negotiators were at the negotiating table for 10 hours, and they negotiated 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 2 weeks. 10 hours they were at the table. So they weren't interested in negotiating a contract. They had laid out their terms, and they essentially told the union to go kick rocks. And so the union said, we have until October 5th, and then our contract is up. And if we haven't ratified a new contract, then we're going out on strike. And that's ultimately what happened. So they've been on strike this will be their 14th day today.
I think the fight against the two-tier system, I think, is an interesting part of this, because that's been a huge part of a lot of the different strikes we've been seeing. This has been the John Deere strikes. This is part of the Kaiser strikes. And yeah, I'm wondering what you think specifically about the fact that this is like this is the moment that people have decided to like push back against 2 or even 3-tier systems that were introduced in the last really like 10 or 15 years for the most part.
Well, I think it's just, it's a divide and conquer strategy for Kellogg's or for these other companies. And ultimately what it looks like is it destabilizes well-established unions, especially at Kellogg's. And it pits workers against each other, particularly at Kellogg's. If they're able to remove this cap on this tier system, what they're essentially doing is they're creating a more precarious workplace for these workers. The turnover rate in the lower tier at the Omaha plant is right around 40%.
Wow.
And, prior to 2015, you didn't really see a whole lot of people leaving the Kellogg's plant. These are workers who are spending their entire careers at this plant. Their parents work there. Their grandparents work there. Because they're all getting paid around the same amount of money, there isn't this tension on the line. So they're working with each other. They're helping each other, right? And with this tier system, what they're doing is they're throwing these newer workers into pretty insane factory conditions and making it really difficult for them to feel like they have any reason to stay there, right? A lot of these people will, put in. Some of these workers were transitional workers who weren't officially hired by the company, that aren't full-time employees. They aren't receiving benefits like the full-time employees are. For 5 years, they work this every day, 7 days a week, 3 months on end, right? They have this really, punitive attendance-based point system that discourages you calling in sick. There's injuries that happen in the factory all the time. I went out to the line and wrote a piece for The Real News about this, and pretty much every person I talked to showed me scars from accidents that happened, injuries in the plant. The union president himself got his hand stuck in a mill and broke all the fingers in his hand. He had to have 10 surgeries on his hand,
Jesus Christ.
There was an accident at the plant 2 or 3 weeks ago where a transitional employee got both arms stuck in a conveyor belt,
Jesus.
The thing is these folks super proud of the work that they do. Like, absolutely 100% take this work extremely seriously. They're not even asking for changes to their overtime. They are not asking for, anything that, from me on the outside, I'd be fighting for more humane working conditions. But to them, it's not like it's a point of pride, but they feel that they have put blood, sweat, tears, fractured relationships, time that they could be spending with their children into this factory, and Kellogg's is essentially fucking them over.
Yeah.
They see it as, we have sacrificed for this company for years and years and years. And we are asking for equal pay for all and for everyone to have the same health care so that we can do this job, and Kellogg's is saying, no, absolutely. I think the union president said that some of the negotiators called those demands outlandish during negotiations, which I think is just incredible, just corporate greed.
Yeah, and I think the other part of the story is that, it's kind of a weird consequence of it, but one of the consequences of sort of rising staple commodity prices, like staple grain prices and stuff, is that Kellogg's they have record profits right now.
Oh yeah,
and they're still just doing this shit because
they made record profits during the pandemic.
Yeah,
they gave their CEO a pretty hefty raise bonus. There was a stock buyback program that happened among the C-suite folks last year. They made a lot of money. And, these workers worked every day through the pandemic, continually understaffed, doing their best. Because again, they take this job very seriously, and they are proud that they are feeding the American people, and they are proud to work at Kellogg's. And they feel that this contract is just shit. It's just shit. And, the only sensible thing to do is to walk out on strike, because, they've been backed into a corner and negotiations have stagnated completely, and they don't want to back down from this, and I agree. I feel what they're asking for is fair. It's very fair.
I mean, I think I think asking for a lot more would be fair, but that's not my place to be doing. One of the things that strikes me about this, you talk about this tier system that Kellogg's introduced, which I can't help but think of what happened at John Deere, where they, I think in 96, cut pensions by 2/3, and then like last year eliminated them entirely in this kind of bid to pit chunks of the workforce against each other, where you have like, different groups making different amounts, and sort of like, I don't know, it seems kind of like the strategy that you see in the broader economy, like within the space of a company, where you've got like some people who are getting pretty well taken care of in their jobs, and other newer people who are getting more screwed over in kind of this attempt to create division within the workforce, so that this kind of organizing doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. Yeah. And you also have to think, if they are able to remove this cap on the transitional tier, what that means is they'll be able to, instead of say a full-time employee retires, they leave that space empty, but they still need an extra space, an extra person, right? So they can just hire a transitional worker instead of funneling one of those transitional workers into that full-time space. What ends up happening is suddenly you have, instead of 70% full-time to 30% transitional, it starts tipping, right? It becomes a more precarious workforce. Then say, for example, they do that in the next 5 years, now they have 70% of these transitional workers who don't think the union is offering anything for them. They can essentially just offer a better deal to these transitional workers and kick the union out of the company at some point, and these folks on the line understand that and know that that's kind of Kellogg's plan, right? Yeah. They know that what Kellogg's is trying to do is essentially destabilize the power of the union inside the plants. And everyone on the line that I've spoken with know exactly what's happening, and these full-time employees are out there every day making sure that their transitional, colleagues know that that's why they're out there, because they want to not allow this to be something that divides their workforce. It remains to be seen what's going to happen. You know what I mean? They've brought in scabs to get the plant up and running again. And most recently, yesterday, the Building and Construction Trades Council Union met with the union president in Omaha because they have about 100 third-party ironworkers, carpenters, electricians, and skilled tradespeople that are union tradespeople that have contracts at Kellogg's. And they came to what Dan Osborne, the union president, called was a tough decision, that those union workers are going to cross the picket line to honor those contracts. So Kellogg's is forcing the unions in the city into a bind, really, because they're going to lose their own contracts at Kellogg's. So that's kind of been like the most recent development here, is that rather than just temps coming in, we have now skilled union tradespeople from various Omaha unions who are also crossing the picket line to honor their contracts at Kellogg's, past these striking workers. So it's a bit of a mess, a little bit,
Yeah. There's so much going on right now I'm kind of wondering what you think are the because we've got a number of strikes kind of all coming to a head at the same time. I'm wondering specifically from the Kellogg strike, what do you think are kind of the lessons that should be taken from what's happened so far for the broader labor movement?
I think the biggest thing that's kind of impacted me as I've gone to the line, I've stood on the picket line, I've covered these, this strike, I've talked to people, is that when these types of actions happen, they really only can be sustained because the community comes together to support them. These strike funds that are going around and folks showing up to stand on the picket line who are not part of the union are really sort of become, they are helping support these workers who can only hold out so long with finite resources, right? So the big thing to me is that past these news cycles of excitement of Striketober, of, these people just walked out today. Well, they may be on the line for months and months on end, and the news cycle is going to move on, and these communities are still going to have to try and back up these labor actions, right? You really can't have a true, you can't have a labor movement without, support, right? And that's kind of been the biggest thing that has impacted me, particularly, Omaha used to be a really formidable union town, back in the 80s, it was really, really something to see. The business unions in the various locals here really had, some of these union leaders had more political power than the mayor, right? And that has gone downhill over the last 40 years. And it's really cool to see the level of solidarity that's happening amongst the community, in the ways in which people are kind of coming out to talk to and be a part of this strike, and to remind these Kellogg's workers that they're not operating in a bubble, and that the rest of the community really hopes that the strike will end quickly and peacefully and with a really good resolution for these workers,
One other thing I wanted to ask about in terms of sort of this kind of research into the union movement, and in terms of sort of community support, is the level of violence that there's been against against these strikes. Like, I've seen a lot of stuff about people getting hit by buses, and I don't know if I think I'm getting my strikes. I don't know if there've been direct car attacks on this specific picket line, but that's been a thing that it's been happening a lot. And I was wondering,
at least a couple of documented cases.
Yeah. And I was wondering what you think about that, and what actually can be done about the fact that this, just the fact that we're just seeing auto attacks on picket lines just regularly now.
I mean, that's it's a shitty development. I was out on the picket line last Thursday, and they were attempting to bring in buses at shift change past the picketers, who walk slowly. They don't stop in front of the bus. It's illegal to stop and make it, so that they can't pass through the gates. But they slow them down for a little bit. And one gentleman was was standing there, and this bus just bumped right into him. There's videos that have been shared through local news of buses knocking down workers as they're trying to cross the picket line. And there are also personal vehicles that go through, and it could be the private security that's been hired. It could be managers. But they're running through these lines really quickly, dangerously. It's unfortunate. And, I don't have an answer for what the best solution for that is, but vehicle attacks have become sort of more, I don't want to say commonplace, but you see them happening a lot, both at protests last year. And, I think Warrior Met Coal had some bosses running through the lines and being reckless with their vehicles, The problem is on the back end, the police don't step in when they see these instances, And in fact, last Thursday, when we had 100 plus motorcyclists from various MCs show up to support the strike. The police were the ones who protected the scabs and made sure that they made it through the picket line. So, the answer to that, not sure.
Yeah, I mean that's a time-honored police tradition.
Yeah,
they historically don't exist to protect laborers, with the notable exception of the sheriff in what was it, Mattawan, during the coal miner strike in West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, they shot him. So,
well, yeah, but he shot some people first.
Yeah.
Sid Hatfield, that was the name.
Yeah, I don't know. I've gotten to know some of these folks on the line over the last 2 weeks, and they're just fantastic human beings, They are accommodating and hardworking, and they come from all age brackets, and they bring their families out, and they're getting a raw deal from Kellogg's, and so far the community support has been overwhelmingly positive. There hasn't really been like at the John Deere strike, they're not getting eggs thrown at them, They get a lot more honking and messages of support than they do people driving by to yell at them for, being on strike. So that's been nice to see, And actually this weekend on Saturday, there's going to be a cool vintage car show, cruise around Kellogg's event that they've got planned. The fire department's bringing rigs, and Teamsters
Good for the
are
fire department.
Yeah, and the Teamsters are bringing cars, and there's a bunch of vintage car clubs that are going to be coming out. So, those types of things have really kind of fired up these people to keep them out on the line as long as they need to be. So community's there for them.
One of the things I'm continuing to wonder about is what it takes to close the gap between understanding that you and your colleagues are getting screwed over by this system, and understanding that you and all of the other people striking at the same time, and perhaps even a bunch of people not striking, are all kind of fighting the same fight, and that maybe there's grander things to achieve than the negotiation of a single contract. Because that seems like the big leap that is going to be the real struggle to clear.
I will say that some of the workers are fully aware that this is not just about a single contract negotiation, and is actually, more about struggles of the working class against corporate greed, and the ways in which the working class gets their asses handed to them all the time. And they know that. They know that at some point, perhaps at some point in the future, someone else is going to look at their example and be inspired by it, right? As far as maybe, I don't know, ideologically speaking or politically speaking, for these folks, it's doesn't fit into any sort of ideology, leftist or conservative or whatever. Everyone's got their own personal politics, but they don't really talk about it on the line. What they talk about is working class versus ruling class. That's their sense. It's corporate greed. It's asshole CEOs making $11.6 million a year while they're struggling to pay their own bills, And that conversation is more common than trying to fit this into a larger political movement or revolutionary movement, if that makes sense, Yeah. But I would say that the vast majority of the workers, regardless of their own personal politics, have a very clear sense of where they sit in terms of class consciousness, and understand that this is one of the most effective tactics to try and force the hand of these assholes, is to withhold work and withhold their labor. So,
well, this has been great. I mean, that's everything I had to ask. Chris, anything else?
Not that I have. So,
is there a call to action we could have for our listeners, or pages people should be following?
A strike fund.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, there's a GoFundMe and there's a PayPal set up for the Omaha Strikers. I believe the BCTGM international page has a page of each of the strike funds for each of the 4 plants. So that might be something that you might want to share with your listeners. I can send you an email with that, because it's probably going to be easier to do. But But yeah, as far as I know, BCTGM hasn't called for an official boycott of Kellogg's products. However, they wouldn't be mad if you just didn't buy any right now. There was some talk last week that some of the picketers might, be flyering outside of grocery stores to try and educate the community on what's going on with this strike. But beyond that, they also are concerned about the quality of the food being produced by scabs. So it probably would be healthy for you to not buy the food, because I think it was in 2018 during a lockout in Memphis. The same company that they brought in then that they're bringing in now pissed in the cereal on the line. And they didn't release video of that for 2 years after the incident. So it ended up in someone's home. Gross. Yikes. Yeah.
That is some, I guess that's some scab shit, but
that's some scab
even
shit.
By scab standards.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked, right? So support your local strike fund. And if you are in a city where Kellogg's plant is striking, I'm sure those workers would love to hear from you, feel your support. So,
where can our listeners follow you?
I am on Twitter primarily at Cold Brewed Tool. I don't know why I picked that name, but I
like it.
Yeah. I got. I haven't changed that handle since I got on Twitter. So, but yeah, that's usually where I'm at. Otherwise, I teach locally and have a podcast that I'm developing and do a bunch of different projects. So Twitter's the best way to get a hold of me if you have questions.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks for having me on, folks.
Thanks
I appreciate
for talking
it.
to us, Mel.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
I'll be back at the picket line, talking to these folks, and I'm going to do my best to keep this shit in the news cycle so that they aren't forgotten. So
awesome.
We've got a link to the strike fund and some other ways to help in the description. So yeah, this has been It Could Happen Here Pod. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Happen Here Pod and at Cool Zone Media for all the rest of our shows.
Hi, this is Jo Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives. And I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
In 2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Please search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everybody, Robert Evans here, your favorite podcaster, also legally the only podcaster that people are allowed to enjoy on the internet, here to introduce a really exciting episode of It Could Happen Here. So for the last bit of time, I've been in and out of touch with a number of members of the Puget Sound John Brown Club. They have provided armed self-defense groups for a couple of different protests in the Washington area over the last year and change. And we wanted to sit down and talk to them about the ideas behind community self-defense, how to do it responsibly, how to do it irresponsibly. We also had some discussions with them about the disasters that happened at the CHOP/Chaz last year. They were not involved with that as an organization, but they have some insights on the matter. That's going to be coming at you in a separate episode or maybe even a couple of episodes in the near future. Today, we're just kind of talking about the concepts of armed community self-defense, you know, what's responsible, what's irresponsible, how people should think about it. I think you'll enjoy the conversation. Here it is. A decent chunk of the folks listening, especially the Portlanders, will have experience with, and that Garrison and I have certainly had experience with, it is people at protests declaring themselves security, sometimes even wearing shirts that say security, and picking up a variety of weapons, often paintball guns and mace, and using them often irresponsibly on other protesters, on bystanders, in the name of keeping things safe. And I think we're pretty clear, and I think most reasonable people can see that that's not community self-defense. But often those people certainly claim that what they're doing is community self-defense. And I'm specifically wanting to start by getting a kind of a range of definitions from folks, as you are all people who have engaged in community self-defense, and particularly armed community self-defense. What do you see as the actual role of community self-defense, and how should it look as opposed to, you know, a guy with a paintball gun yelling at kids for tagging a window? Ray, you wanna kick us off with an answer there?
I do. Community defense should be part of a broad health and safety infrastructure set up for a protest movement or a community. I'm being deliberately vague here, but specifically armed community defense deals with mitigating lethal and egregious harm to members of a community. The goal is first and foremost prevention, mitigation, and control of those threats. In my mind, ideally, community defense would involve no one doing anything, carrying around a bunch of really heavy shit and nothing happening, but deterring those from harming others. And in the absolute worst case, it means you have to actually do something that can get messy pretty quickly.
I want to circle back to a couple of things. Actually, I do have one quick follow-up question for you before we move on to the next people, Ray. When you say, like, carrying heavy things and whatnot, I'm wondering, like, what do you think I'm interested in you, and I'll probably ask other people this follow up. When it comes to bringing a firearm to either a protest situation or some other community self-defense situation, what is going through your head when you determine what to bring? Because I've seen people carry a variety of different guns, from like shotguns and in one case is a Mosin Nagant to ARs or handguns. What do you think is kind of the logic train, I guess, that you would take, and like what is the appropriate tool to bring like in this situation?
So that depends entirely on what the anticipated threat is and how one plans to mitigate the anticipated threat. There's no correct answer for that. Sometimes the answer to mitigate lethal or egregious bodily harm is not a firearm at all. Indeed, firearms are applicable in an extraordinarily narrow range of scenarios, but those range of scenarios are catastrophic and need extreme measures to be mitigated. So it depends on if you are considering bringing a firearm, what is the firearm good at? And then you get into the minutia of what firearm's good for what thing, which depends on your legal context and particular threat. But I think one has to start with the question is the thing I'm bringing able to mitigate the type of harm I might see happen to my community? And to get a little bit less vague, there are people who think that bringing a shotgun is a good way to stop a car speeding into a crowd when it clearly isn't, right? Mm-hmm. So one has to make sure that the tool, whatever they have, is appropriate for the task at hand and the threat you anticipate.
Oh, that was great. Thank you, Ray. KD, you want to give us your answer next?
I agree with everything that Ray said, and the only addition that I'd make is that it specifically in our cases generally doesn't mean standing between protesters and police, but more guiding protesters, or activists or participants away from potential situations of harm. It's like we can't stand in front of police and stop cops from doing their job. Like that just gets you arrested, and
or worse.
And that's not what we're here for. So that's all I wanted to add.
Could you, because I have chatted with a couple of your number about this, about kind of the role that an armed contingent at a protest can play in kind of allowing an avenue of retreat, especially during confrontations with non-state actors. I'm interested in kind of what you, you're not to kind of, as you did kind of clarify a misconception, you don't see your role as standing in front of the protesters between them and the cops and like presenting a threat to the cops. What is the utility in kind of an active protest situation that you've seen of what y'all do? So
that's a good question. And if we're doing our job well, then most people think we don't do anything at all. A lot of what we do is we're watching external potential threats who might try to come in. The most common vector these days is a car. Mm-hmm. But generally, we're looking for folks that might cause trouble and ensuring that we're not putting ourselves in a position where we're going to get cornered or trapped, and really, just trying to help facilitate and work with the facilitators and organizers to keep things, progressing in a safe way. So as far as what we're protecting against threat-wise, that ranges from everything from like angry people who are just angry and trying to go home and getting blocked by a protest to people who are actively looking to do harm to a movement that happens to be involved in the protest, or maybe it's something as specific as a person who's looking to specifically do harm to organizers. So most of the time we're focused outward and just making sure that our exits are covered and that we have ways to get people away from potential bad situations.
That was great. Thank you, Katie. Shannon, you want to give your answer next?
Absolutely. Thanks. I would add there's a really critical element to community defense that begins and ends with the word community. Obviously, there's a big difference between proclaiming your self-security and showing up someplace and being there as an intentional community support where the community plays a role in you being there and also has some influence on that question of what are you carrying and what is the response. So I think it's just really important that you keep the community aspect at the forefront and that's a huge part of our collective work, is making sure that when we're providing community defense, we're aligning ourselves with the desires of the community group that has asked us to be there, also filtering it through our judgment as to what's safe and appropriate under the circumstances, using some of those filters that Ray mentioned when they were answering.
And what do you see as like this is something that I kind of gets to both what is an issue with me and kind of the folks who declare themselves as security, which is that they're often kind of separating themselves from the rest of the movement, specifically in a cop-like way, to say like, well, it's my job to keep you safe, even if that means, or it's my job to keep things orderly, even if that means attacking some other people at this protest. One of the things that Scott Crow in his in Setting Sights, which is a really good book on community self-defense, does is set out that a key aspect of community self-defense, as you said, is that you're like a member of the community. And I guess the question I have is, because guns are what they are and have the kind of cultural weight that they have, it's people who accept being armed as an aspect of their personality are always going to be kind of fighting having that dominate their personality, and it's clearly something that a lot of people have an issue with. The thing that is important is to be a member of the community who happens to be armed, as opposed to an armed activist whose role is being armed, right? Like, I mean, do you agree with what I'm saying, or kind of like, I'm wondering how you think about it, because this is something that I'm kind of going around in my head about as well, because it's clearly where a lot of the problems happen, right? That the gun becomes central to the identity of the people who bring it, which is something that happens to the cops.
Yes, and also the mentality of separating yourself from the community and not being part of the purpose of being there. And so I'll defer to my comrades here to go a little bit further with it, but I would just say that there's a significant difference between armed community defense and having an intentional presence of armed community defense at an event or a protest and being a person who shows up with a gun. Those are two really different things. And so I think that's one of the benefits of being part of an organization that does this collectively, with accountability, with training, with a known role in the community, so that there is consistency among what we do and why we do it, and a history of folks understanding that if we're present somewhere, it's because we've been asked to be there, and that what we're doing there is aligned with and approved of by the people who are organizing the event. And then I'll let somebody else who's more eloquent than I am answer that further if they feel like they can.
Yeah, I think Nova is up now. If you wanted to give your answer and kind of also comment on what we've been chatting about, what Shannon and I were just chatting about, Nova.
Hi, thank you so much. I would say that folks like Ray and Katie, and of course Shannon, really put it very succinctly, very well together, and answered a lot of the things that I was going to, already provided things that I was going to add to it. But the specifically the part about the gun becoming the driving factor in somebody's presence at a protest, or the gun being a part of the personality of somebody who's going to appoint themselves as a guardian towards a bunch of people, I would say that with any responsible community defense role within a protest context, that the act of being a body in between a threat and your community has to come first, and that the firearm has to be secondary. There was an incident on the 300th night of protest where many of us were at risk of being harmed by a vehicle attack. And in retrospect, a firearm would not have mitigated that threat terribly well. But the idea of being in between a threat such as that and somebody else who is possibly more vulnerable than you are bore a lot more of a significance on that. So the firearm being there to respond to a threat and perhaps mitigate an active, ongoing, deadly threat to your community is one thing. But I think the primary thing is going to be just putting yourself in harm's way so that you can spare that responsibility from somebody possibly more vulnerable than you, if that makes sense. That should be the primary responsibility.
And how do you avoid letting that turn people doing that into feeling like a separate and even elevated chunk of the community? Because that, again, that's what happens with police. You know, this idea that it starts as like, well, we're here to serve and protect, and that through a variety of toxic alchemies turns into this idea of the thin blue line. What is the way you push back on that? How do you actually stop it from going from I'm someone who is accepting personal responsibility for the well-being of the people around me, and putting my body in between them on harm's way if necessary, to it's my job to protect people, to it's my job to, from turning that into kind of this idea of, I think, stewardship in some ways that like some people in law enforcement have, where like they get to tell you what to do because that's their responsibility to keep you safe. Like how do you stop that attitude from evolving? Because I've seen it happen to people fairly quickly when they put themselves in some of these situations sometimes, and it's certainly not like most people, but it doesn't take a long time for somebody to like, especially if they're vulnerable to get in that position. So how do you, especially if you're approaching it from an organizational standpoint, right? You're an organization made up of people who come to do this. How do you fight back against that? Like, what is the active kind of counter programming, if you will?
I'd say I don't have an easy answer for that question, to be completely honest with you, but I'd say that the closest thing to an answer to that would be that an almost, monastic devotion to the task that was asked of you by the group that asked you there. So if somebody asks us to be a part of a march and to simply look outward for external threats and to be willing to respond to those threats if need be, again, putting our bodies in harm's way, but also be willing to respond to lethal force in kind, should the worst case scenario arise. I'd say that the ultimate accountability rests with the people who asked you to be there. And there's no easy answer as to what that mechanism of accountability looks like. But in several layers, that would start with your teammates, the people who are part of your organization that asked you to be, that is asked to be there. So other members of JBGC are definitely going to try and keep each other accountable. But it's also the larger the larger contingent of the action that you're a part of, to be ultimately willing to back down from whatever you're doing if a concern is voiced by that community. And I wish I had a better way to word that, but just the constant vigilance within oneself against overstepping the boundaries that were clearly set by people who invited you into a space. That's really the best answer I can give for that at the moment without further percolating.
Well, I mean, yeah, for one thing, I think this is the reason we're having this conversation, and I'm getting ahead of us a little, is because this is still very much a developing thing on the left, and I don't think anybody has all the answers on how to do it well, although I think an increasing number of folks accept the necessity. So I think that's part of the reason for the conversation, is this like continuing exploration of how to actually do this responsibly. But I do think you hit on something important there when you talked about that you're there at the invitation of a community, as opposed to you are there to police or to maintain order. Like the idea of approaching it as if you're a guest strikes me as a really good idea, in order to keep yourself on a certain behavioral standpoint. Like I'm here at the request of this community as their guest, as opposed to I am here to protect this community. You know?
Absolutely. That's a perfect way to summarize what I was trying to go for with that one. I think that ultimately to be averse to being put in a position of power or authority is the best way to check against that, and to simply be a servant to the community that is, again, inviting you into that space and putting yourself in a servile is not the right word. I'm looking for a different word for that, but a position of service, a true position. What community defense should be is ultimately a service and a burden rather than a reward of responsibility and power over your fellow community members.
Okay, yeah, great. I think next was Ray again. You had something to say there?
Yeah, to finish that thought, in my notes I did a section of what happens when things go right. I think one thing that can go right is normalizing that firearms are just a thing that can be around, and they don't have to be your entire ass personality, nor do they have to be a differentiating factor. Indeed, I think one of the successes, there are not many, but of community defense in the CHOP was normalizing the idea that people can have firearms and they're not an inherent threat. Thinking of people who were armed often and were pointed out routinely, and it was like, nah, he's chill. He's a cool dude. You know, just a guy, just like, things like, you know, do you really think the black guy is going to shoot up the CHOP? I don't know, that he's totally fine. I know him, his jokes are great. Again, overhearing these kind of conversations, it helps, you know, firearms become like part of the tapestry of life, not this differentiating factor, not a beauty item, not something to wrap your personality around. It's just like they're there, and they can be good, bad, right, wrong, or indifferent. And I think that normalizing effect is one of the successes community defense can have. And I'm happy to talk about other things that community defense can normalize. But I wanted to emphasize you just have a firearm. You're not talking about it. You're not touching it. You're not thinking about it. You know, people have that. It's just around. And it became pretty chill. And there was kind of, at the CHOP specifically, there's an area where firearms just kind of were around and nothing happened really. And that was kind of wonderful in my mind.
So, from my experience with the club, it's basically like, even though we are the John Brown Gun Club, the guns are like the last thing that we even consider. Like, it would technically, if we were to actually rename the club, it would be the John Brown De-Escalation Club. We would, like, most of the time, anything that's gone on, even when I did visit the CHOP and there was some weird stuff going on, like Brother Matthew being Brother Matthew, people were using their skills to de-escalate the situation, to calm down individuals, to make sure that whatever hostility they have would be abated through just verbal communication.
Talk about that in a little more detail, because I don't know who. I mean, I was at the Chaz briefly, but I don't know who Brother Matthew was, or like what incident you're talking about. So I'm kind of curious.
Brother Matthew is a guy who shows up here, all around the Seattle area, and also I think he's even showed up in Portland as well. Preacher guy, gets in everybody's faces, usually not liked by everybody. Super afraid of snakes. Thanks, Jerry. But yeah, he's a person who thrives off of confrontation and uses the Bible as his mode of operation. But I remember distinctly at the CHOP, he was getting into it with people, but everybody who was around tried to talk him down. They tried to make him chill out, even though he was continually screaming for attention and just being weird. But in the end, that's just like, that happens more often with protest situations or march situations or direct action situations where we're asked to be a part of it by the organizers. And as Ray had mentioned and Nova had mentioned, we like we're asked to be there, and we're not just asked and then we suddenly show up. Like we get involved with the people who are organizing, any of the partners that they bring into it. We try to learn as much about what's going on with them, who are the threats, where the event is, how the event is going to be thought of. We ask a lot of questions about it. Like we plan to make sure that everything is super safe, or as safe as possible based on all known variables. And then the stuff that's unknown, we do our best to mitigate that somehow. Yes, we are armed, but that's like the last thing that we ever even think of. And that's even in our planning. Like we say flat out, de-escalate first. If things start to ratchet up, respond in kind. So like if someone, like tries to like, I don't know, like starts to fist fight, we're not going to pull out a gun on someone who wants to box somebody on the street. We're going to do our best to stop. So stop them through other means, like whether if it's just to block a punch or whatever. But the first things and foremost is de-escalation. Calm that person down and tell them to go away or just to chill out or whatever is necessary.
I mean, de-escalation, all of the best community self-defense that I've personally watched has been de-escalation. They're not the only situations I've seen. I've seen force used a couple of times in situations that were necessary, but by far de-escalation is the thing I've seen actually protect people in dicey situations the most. And generally that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I know for myself, like my attitude is we all go home. Everybody who shows up there goes home. Not to the hospital, not to jail, or not to the morgue. We all go home.
Yeah, I think that's definitely seems like the best way to look at it.
So into the specific question of how not to become a cop in this position and become the gun. The only way I've been able to do anything in that regard has been to not have that be my primary thing that I fulfill. I'm part of a community and I'm a mechanical person in this community. I try to have my mission be not that other skill set or that other access to being of an aid to a community be my actual purpose in the community, if that makes any sense.
Mm. Yeah, that makes complete sense. And yeah, I think is the healthiest way to deal with it.
So something I've been wondering about so I'm like not armed at all. So I guess I'm on like the other side of the fence of the sort of community self-defense thing when people show up to protests. And so something I was wondering about is the relationship between this stuff and, between this sort of cop mentality development and the difficulty of sort of integrating into the community of having organizations that are basically independent security groups and not, for example, like taking like, I don't know, take like an historical example. Like there was a thing in China you'd see a lot in like the 1900s where, you'd have armed pickets, right? And so you have an armed force there, but the armed force is like, this is like a branch of the union, right? And that's how they sort of like that was their sort of solution to how do you stop cop syndrome, is that they're basically like a part of another community organization. And so I'm curious what y'all think about what the sort of, I guess, the strengths and weaknesses of being an independent or having sort of independent security organizations versus having, I guess, subsections of other organizations that are armed.
Yeah, I feel like I can offer a unique perspective here as someone who's been privy to multiple angles of this, including separate organizations, ones integrated with others, and ones that are sort of just parts of the community. I don't think there's any like inherent sort of best answer here. I do think being part of a separate organization makes it harder to be in the community versus of the community, meaning you came from the community and now you're sort of kind of separate, but not really. like JB in particular has a perpetual problem with people saying, oh, John Brown will do X, and this is something that has been discussed. And often this is to people's immense ire. I don't want to speak for everyone here, but it does seem to be that so seldom does one wish to be said, oh, hello. It's kind of like saying, oh, the union will solve this. And it's like, turns out you're the union, buddy. Right? And never refer to the union in the first person. So I do think being embedded into other groups or being sort of this loose, diffuse group can make it easier to be part of the community because of the structural forces that make that it is easier to get there. A separate organization can help focus and codify certain procedures, training, make sure that people have some sort of unified goals and values at the expense of making it a bit harder to integrate into one's community. I think given the era we're in, I'm not surprised we see many, many approaches to community defense with varying effectiveness at different times, including JB's perspective.
Yeah, and I guess I'm interested as we move on here, and like one of the questions I see is how do the difficulty in kind of, you don't want to have a situation where there's absolutely where the community self-defense contingent is anyone who shows up with a gun, because then anyone can show up with a gun, and you as someone else who's showing up with a weapon are potentially, like, if that person makes a bad decision, that's going to, as it has in the past, that has significant repercussions on everybody else. And I that is one of the thornier points, because I do, one of the things I see as valuable, someone mentioned earlier, like the nice thing about it, just it not being, firearms being normalized, not as a like gun culture thing, but as this is just a thing that is present in the community. And I saw that a lot in Rojava, right? Everybody was armed, or at least a significant chunk of the populace had access to arms, but nobody was showing off with them. They were not like anybody's like piece of identity. They were just one of the tools, like a spade or a shovel that were present in the community. Okay, I think I've skipped over a couple of people. I wanted to give Thud a chance to talk.
That's actually very much sort of in line with what the point I was going to make, which is, for me, a huge part of community defense is making sure that the aspect that is defending the community is not alienated from the community, because it isn't concentrated in just a few people. Because I think one of the other things that we emphasize a lot sort of outside of direct protest actions is we try to teach people how to safely operate firearms, but also to give firearms the respect that they deserve. That firearms are not there so that you are badass. Firearms are not there because you're going to get into a gunfight in school. The first rule, one of the things that we stress, sort of beyond the basic 4 rules of gun safety, is the first rule of gunfight is don't get into a gunfight. Mm-hmm. That it's you want to exhaust every possible option that you have, and when the community at large is engaged, and like Ray was saying, that it becomes normalized that, oh, we're not relying on these several people to keep us safe, but that in fact, as an entire collective, we are keeping us safe. And that gives recognition to the fact that some people, it's not the right choice for them to carry a gun for one reason or another. And at the same time, the power that is present in that particular tool is dispersed to the point where it doesn't, you don't have people getting self-aggrandizing thoughts because of the fact that they're possessing firearms. And I think that's something that we, work really hard to instill in people in a variety of contexts, and I think is really critical to this question.
So the question, I'm just trying to summarize what the question was earlier, what the strengths or weaknesses of having an organized armed response are. One of the things that I wanted to bring up is the historical context of armed response, specifically community armed response in Seattle. I did some digging and found in a book called History of Seattle from the Earliest Settlement to the Present Time, Volume 2, which I started pouring through and found that there was, in 1874, there was a group called the Seattle Amateur Rifle Association, which leased land for a range on present-day Capitol Hill, like right where the train station is, if you're familiar with the area. So like right where protests always happen these days.
Yeah.
Later on, there's record in 1877 of the Seattle Rifle Team organizing a shooting contest. And then later on, in 1886, which is a number that probably rings a bell, the Chinese riots, as they called them at the time, happened, which was sort of the start of the labor movement, where everyone decided that Chinese immigrants were the cause of all of our woes, that the low wages being paid to Chinese immigrants were because of Chinese immigrants and not racism. So they decided to run every person who looked Chinese out of town, literally. They referred to this as the Tacoma method. And
I'm guessing because that's what they did in Tacoma.
Exactly. It started there. And it was February 7th of 1886. This massive, angry, racist mob tried to push all of the Chinese folks out of Seattle, or anyone they thought might look like Chinese. And they tried to push them onto a steamboat, but there wasn't enough room for them all there. Cops got involved. A bunch of other stuff happened. They decided, no, give them time in court. But in the process of making this decision, the racists got a mob together, and we're basically just going to try and put a stop to this before the legal proceedings could go forward. So they reached out to local allies in arms. They had the Home Guards, which I'm not exactly sure what the Home Guards were, but I assume there's something related to National Guard later on, or maybe just an extension of military. But the Home Guards and the Seattle Rifles, as well as the University Cadets, which I'm assuming are, of course, soldiers in training, and pulled them all out and made a community self-defense group out of them. They put a rifle line and held the mob back, and enabled those folks to get, safely to have their day in court. And then to protect them for a while afterward, they actually organized a sort of a watch, because they didn't have enough police to manage the mob. They used folks from the Seattle Rifles and these other groups to sort of bolster the police forces and keep peace in the town. So the sort of thing that we do is long-standing historical presence, but I think there's a lot of things you can look at the history of and sort of take lessons from. So as Ray mentioned, a unified response is, of course, a huge benefit of having a huge strength of having an organized armed group. And it's literally, if someone reaches out and says, we need help, help is available. But there are a lot of weaknesses. Businesses and clubs can be held liable legally. And this is an endemic problem within gun law as it stands. The laws are written such that it comes down to situational context to determine how a gun law should be enforced. And the law will never be on the side of a group trying to abolish parts of the law. Mm-hmm. So you have to be very careful about how especially an organized or formally organized armed group has to be very careful about how they put their work in play with that in mind.
Yeah, that was great. I was unaware, actually. I was aware of the riots. I was unaware of that part of the history, which is fascinating and I think very important. Yeah, Ray, did you want to explain the threat onion?
Yeah, the integrated threat onion. So this is kind of a well-known meme in certain circles / actual thing. And it's designed to help you understand how to mitigate integrated survivability onion, mitigate threats, right? So the teal deer is, do you want to try to preserve life by having body armor and hoping a bullet hits you in the body armor? Or do you want to preserve life by, not showing the fuck up to something where you might get shot? And the idea is it's a meme because so often, people are like, oh, I want to get in there and engage with conflict and be the hero. And the answer is, you could just like not go there, right? And it would probably be a lot easier to do that. But there's some real weight to the survivability onion, which is like there are many, many ways to mitigate threats to yourself and your community. And very often the most boring and mundane answer is probably the one that's going to actually result in the biggest impact. And the heroic answer is probably the absolute worst answer and only what you rely on if everything else has gone to hell. So that's someone, I think it was Thud, alluded to the threat onion and ways to mitigate harm to oneself and one's community. And I had to repeat it because it's this meme that's been coming up forever.
Yeah, and it is like the basic idea of the threat onion is that you have like this, again, you think of it in layers, that's why they call it an onion, of like things that protect you. And the things that provide the most protection are stuff like not being seen or present when somebody wants to harm you, or being behind cover when somebody wants to harm you. And the thing that offers the least protection is having body armor, It's the idea that like the things that people buy and focus on because they look cool are all things that offer less protection than situational awareness and good judgment, is kind of the actual like lesson, I think, to take out of the threat onion. That would be my opinion on the matter.
This has been It Could Happen Here. That's all for this week. Find us at Happen Here Pod on Instagram and Twitter, and find the rest of our shows at Cool Zone Media in the same places.
Hey, we'll be back Monday with more episodes every week from now until the heat death of the universe.
It Could Happen Here is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more podcasts from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find sources for It Could Happen Here updated monthly at coolzonemedia.com/sources. Thanks for listening.
Hi, it's Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And today I'm talking with my dear friend, Krista Williams.
It can change you in the best way possible. Dance with the change, dance with the breakdowns.
The embodiment of Pisces intuition with Capricorn power moves.
So I'm like delusionally proud of my chart.
Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
This is Special Agent Regal, Special Agent Bradley Hall.
In 2018, the FBI took down a ring of spies working for China's Ministry of State Security, one of the most mysterious intelligence agencies in the world.
The Sixth Bureau podcast is a story of the inner workings of the MSS and how one man's ambition and mistakes opened its vault of secrets.
Listen to The Sixth Bureau on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, The Case of Lucy Letby, we unpack the story of an unimaginable tragedy that gripped the UK in 2023. But what if we didn't get the whole story?
Evidence has been made to fit.
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
What if the truth was disguised by a story we chose to believe?
Oh my God, I think she might be innocent.
Listen to Doubt, The Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Echard. In 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
But here's the thing. Bachelor fans hated him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
That's when his life took a disturbing turn. A one-night stand would end in a courtroom.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.